Maria Alejandra Lafuente Casco was a charming young Mexican psychologist, well known for her love of staying fit and active. She took great care of her petite figure, delighting in her own beauty and charm. With her light, wheat-colored complexion, long black hair, full lips, and deep-set eyes, she was a sight to behold. Maria Alejandra loved spending time at the beach, basking in the sun to maintain her impeccable tan. Following in her father's footsteps, the esteemed psychologist and renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Alberto Eduardo, Maria Alejandra held a deep admiration for her father, which ultimately inspired her to pursue a career in psychology. She specialized in treating adolescents and young adults dealing with depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders. Her practice was located on the Roma Sur neighborhood in Mexico City. As a divorcee and a mother of two, Maria Alejandra was eager to find love again and create a new home for her family. However, her divorce had not been amicable. In fact, in 2011, she became involved in a shocking incident against her ex-husband. According to his statements, which remain anonymous as per authorities' decision, the incident occurred after their separation. He had gone to visit their children when Maria Alejandra asked him to enter the living room and sit on a strangely plastic-covered sofa. At first, he refused, but she insisted, claiming their daughter had a surprise for him. Reluctantly, he agreed to blindfold himself and take a seat. After several minutes of silence, not hearing any sounds from his daughter or Maria Alejandra, he grew suspicious. Just as he was confirming his suspicions, he felt a severe blow to his head. Struck by the fireplace poker, instantly removing his blindfold, he pleaded with his ex-wife to calm down. But she continued her assault. In a desperate attempt to escape, he realized the door was locked. With her ex-husband now fully at her mercy, Maria Alejandra grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed him in the abdomen and back. Cornered and in severe pain, he tried to wrest the knife from her grasp, only for her to bite his arm. The woman tried to inject him with a substance using a syringe, but he struggled and managed to get her off of him, eventually escaping. The couple's daughter, who had witnessed her parents violently confront each other on numerous occasions, saw everything that happened that traumatic night. In none of the previous instances of violence had the couple sought intervention from authorities. However, this time was different. The man believed that Maria Alejandra had gone too far, so he decided to report her. According to the files, the psychologist was accused by the Homicide Prosecutor's Office of the Mexico City Attorney General's Office of Attempted Homicide. Maria Alejandra was taken to jail, and the 67th criminal judge issued a pretrial detention order. Later, the charge was reclassified to attempted mitigated homicide. On June 14, 2012, she was sentenced to serve 1 year and 4 months in prison. However, Maria Alejandra and her lawyers quickly mobilized to obtain various benefits. As a result, she was released after obtaining a sentence substitution for the payment of fines, as well as conditional suspension of the sentence or compensation for material damage, a fine of 18,843 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,009 at the current exchange rate, and for moral damages compensation, 31,200 pesos, approximately $1,836. Despite obtaining these advantages, the defense lawyers were dissatisfied with the judicial resolution. They argued that Maria Alejandra had acted in self-defense, claiming that her ex-husband used to beat her. Therefore, they filed an appeal against the sentence, which was reviewed by the magistrates of the 9th Criminal Chamber. Ultimately, these magistrates determined that the woman was not criminally responsible and ordered her full release, lifting the sentence. Upon her release, Maria Alejandra returned to her psychology practice as if nothing had happened. The image she projected ultimately worked in her favor, as she presented herself as an empowered victim who had overcome gender violence. But with a new life came a new victim. Back in her practice, Maria Alejandra met Alan Carrera Cuellar, a 41-year-old Mexican businessman. The man was the son of Adrián Carrera Fuentes, a former director of the now-defunct Federal Judicial Police, who had had a long and fruitful career in law enforcement, holding chief positions in different institutions. Adrián, Alan's father, established several businesses aimed at supplying the construction sector with materials. He specialized mainly in the sale of tiles and founded a chain of stores in southern Mexico. While his commercial establishments were legitimate, Adrián had mafia connections. Consequently, he was removed from his position to face legal proceedings and was charged due to his direct ties with the Juarez Cartel, a Mexican criminal organization involved in drug trafficking and other illicit activities. This group controlled a significant percentage of drug trafficking from Mexico to the United States. The organization was led by Amado Carrillo, who died in 1997 in a Mexico City hospital after undergoing extensive plastic surgery to change his appearance. Adrián was accused of providing protection to both Carrillo and Juan Garcia, the leader of the Gulf Cartel. Garcia was on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in the 1990s until his arrest in January 1996. He was later extradited to the United States, where he was convicted on 22 counts of money laundering, drug possession, and trafficking. These events are significant due to their direct and indirect impact on Alan's life. Since Adrián was associated with such influential figures in the criminal world, it was anticipated, given the accumulated evidence against him and his own confession, that he would spend at least 20 years in prison. However, by participating in the Witness Protection Program during the investigation of the Juarez Cartel by the Attorney General's Office of Mexico, he was released on July 18, 2000, to dedicate himself entirely to his businesses. Meanwhile, Alan joined the family business, managing the tile stores founded by his influential father. This role not only helped him earn a good income, but also left him with a lot of free time. He was married and had a daughter, but in early 2011, he divorced his wife, leaving him devastated, depressed, and struggling with alcoholism. That's when he decided to seek therapy and started attending psychological consultations with Alberto, Maria Alejandra's father. At the same time, his teenage daughter, affected by her parents' breakup, started attending sessions with a psychologist to learn how to cope with the consequences of their separation and to manage this traumatic process. Her father's therapist recommended this, and she ended up discussing her issues with Maria Alejandra. Alan accompanied his daughter to the clinic, and after the third session, Maria Alejandra asked the girl to introduce her to her father, claiming professional reasons. She said she wanted to talk to him to make better progress in therapy. However, this was just an excuse, as Maria Alejandra wanted to get to know Alan on a personal level. It didn't take long for them to start a romantic relationship. When the teenager found out, she was furious and stopped attending the sessions, but not before confronting Maria Alejandra about her misconduct. Maria Alejandra, assertive and intimidating, threatened to kill the young girl if she interfered with the new relationship. After a few weeks, what started as casual dates and romantic encounters turned into a formal marriage proposal from Alan. He decided to start a new life with Maria Alejandra, completely unaware of the reasons behind her separation from her ex-husband. One weekend in April 2014, Alan went to visit his family and introduced Maria Alejandra as his soon-to-be wife. They informed everyone that they would be getting married within a week, and she even mentioned that she might be pregnant. The wedding took place the following Monday, but no members of the Carrero family attended. They weren't invited under the premise that the ceremony would be very intimate. Only Maria Alejandra's father, his wife, and their children attended. Maria Alejandra, seemingly perfect, soon revealed her true nature. After the wedding, things started to change drastically. The newlyweds' relationship began to turn tumultuous, though there are not many details about what transpired between them. As Alan was a very reserved man, it is known that violence escalated in their interactions. Alan's family disapproved of his relationship with Maria Alejandra, noticing that he became more prone to anger and seemed increasingly worried. For this reason, all of Alan's loved ones preferred to keep their distance from his wife. At some point, Maria Alejandra, who had no regard for privacy, went through Alan's phone and allegedly found compromising messages that suggested he was involved with another woman. She claimed this was the final straw, stating that she was tired of enduring constant mistreatment from Alan and was unwilling to tolerate his infidelity as well. Convinced that trying to save the relationship was futile, she did not want to try therapy. She also didn't consider legally ending the relationship through a divorce, as they both had done with their previous marriages. To her, there was only one way to solve the problem: eliminate her husband. From that point on, she coldly calculated every step to execute her plan perfectly. Meanwhile, Alan seemed unaware of the extent of the conflict with Maria Alejandra and maintained his work routines and contact with his family. Despite the family's differences with his new wife, Alan remained close to his loved ones, communicating daily through WhatsApp. They respected his decisions, and although they found the marriage to be somewhat rushed, they continued to support him. Surprisingly, the family contact dynamic changed abruptly. On October 31, 2014, Alan exchanged messages with his family for the last time. Overnight, everyone lost contact with him. He didn't show up at work, at his parents' house, or at his daughter's house. Additionally, while he responded to text messages, they seemed to be written strangely. He didn't answer phone calls or send voice messages. On November 5, 2014, Maria Alejandra executed her plan with premeditation and cold blood. She waited for her husband to return home from work and gave him a glass containing a drink laced with a psychoactive drug used to treat depression and other mood disorders. The drug has sedative effects due to its composition, and it's a prescription medication that causes drowsiness and impairs movement. Once she was sure he was completely sedated, Maria Alejandra showed no mercy. She stabbed Alan in the abdomen with a sharp kitchen tool while he was defenseless, waiting for him to take his last breath. The next step was to dispose of the body. She placed it on the bedroom floor and used an electric saw to dismember his body into pieces that she could handle and store in plastic garbage bags. To facilitate transportation, she put the bags into a red suitcase. The body parts that could help identify him were placed in another bag and stored in her kitchen freezer. Once everything was in order, around 12:45 a.m., she called the security guards of the private housing estate where she lived. She asked for help to load the suitcase into her van, as recorded in the security logbook of that day. The condominium security personnel found her extremely nervous and desperate, glancing around in all directions. They asked her what was in the suitcase, and she replied that it was her father's surgical equipment, and that she needed to transport it to the hospital immediately because she was very sick, and he was going to perform emergency surgery on her. During the time she was away from her residence, she scattered the bags containing the body parts in 2 different parts of the city. Upon returning home, she changed the locks on the doors and informed the residential security guard that she was going on a trip with her husband. On November 6, 2014, Mexico City police found a human torso without upper limbs. In the afternoon, they had found other human remains, including arms and legs without hands or feet, in black plastic bags. The distance between the first and second discovery sites was considerable, explaining why Maria Alejandra took so long to return to the condominium that early morning. The remains were transferred to the Institute of Forensic Sciences, where anthropologist specialists determined that they belonged to a single person. but they were unable to identify the individual at that time. To distract Alan's relatives and prevent them from notifying the police, Maria Alejandra used her husband's mobile phone to send greetings and respond to all received messages. She temporarily succeeded in ensuring that no one suspected his tragic end, buying herself time to organize a plan to appear guilt-free, just as she had done when she attacked her first husband. Alan's siblings and daughter received WhatsApp messages in which he supposedly commented that he regretted getting married and announced that he had recently started a relationship with another woman. Other contradictory messages stated that he liked being alone, and some said he was traveling. At the same time, Alberto, Maria Alejandra's father, began calling Alan's father to inquire if they knew the whereabouts of his daughter, whom he had been searching for days without any news. Later, he called Alan's parents again to inform them that he had found Maria Alejandra and that she was admitted to the National Institute of Psychiatry, seeking treatment for depression caused by Alan's supposed infidelity. He also mentioned that she had become paranoid, thinking that the police were after her, which was another reason for her hospitalization. In the midst of this web of deception, months passed, but when December came with its special connotation of family unity, Alan's relatives decided to go to his house to see him. Once again, Maria Alejandra was a step ahead. She notified them that they would not be at the location, as they had decided to take a vacation. This story did not make sense to them at all, especially after Alberto's call confirming that she was in the city and undergoing psychiatric treatment. So when the alarmed family went to the police and filed a missing person report for Alan, it only took a few days for the authorities to notice that the report matched the recently found remains. The prosecutors cross-referenced information with staff from the Center for Missing and Absent Persons. These conversations helped them progress in achieving a full identification of the victim. They compared the characteristics of the human remains with the reports of missing persons with similar physical traits. Finally, Alan's body was identified by his relatives. The officers then decided to inspect the couple's house, and upon arrival, they found Maria Alejandra. The detectives immediately took her to the police station and secured a search warrant. Once obtained, they searched the house for evidence and finally found Alan's head, feet, and hands, as well as an electric saw. The investigators found blood traces in one of the rooms and in the bathroom using luminal tests. They also noticed that the surface of the mattress and a piece of the carpet had been cut out to erase evidence of fluids. It was later determined that Maria Alejandra had used these items to support Alan's body parts. Initially, she was questioned as a witness, but fell into constant and obvious contradictions, becoming the main person of interest in the case. The investigation soon determined that she was the one sending messages from her husband's cell phone to make his family believe he was alive and not report his disappearance. Maria Alejandra claimed she knew nothing about Alan, that she had not seen him for several days, and that they barely communicated through text messages. Taking advantage of her background as a psychologist and trying to prove her innocence, she showed an admission form to a psychiatric clinic dated during the days when her husband disappeared. Initially, Maria Alejandra denied all responsibility, but Alan's body spoke for itself, and the forensic experts were able to perfectly reconstruct the events. From their analysis, the experts noted in the autopsy protocol that a wound was visible on the torso, caused by a sharp instrument that had penetrated the abdomen and was classified as lethal. With all the evidence that the authorities gathered at the couple's house, as well as at the sites where they found his remains, the investigators were able to establish Maria Alejandra's connection to her husband's cruel death. The detectives had testimonies placing her at the scene of the time of the events, and this was supported by the building's security log, which detailed the specific times she left and entered. Plus, the issue of the heavy suitcase that they helped her load into her vehicle. In addition, Statements from Alan's daughter and sister revealed that the psychologist had threatened the young girl with taking her life if she opposed the relationship with her father. Although Maria Alejandra attempted to evade responsibility by admitting herself to a psychiatric center, forensic studies confirmed that she did not suffer from any mental illness. Finally cornered by the evidence, Maria Alejandra confessed to the fatal assault against her husband and admitted that she took him by surprise. However, she justified her actions by stating she was tired of the domestic violence she was experiencing. On December 10, 2014, the court issued a formal prison order for Maria Alejandra for the crime of homicide. From that moment on, information began to emerge that could implicate the woman in other fatal violent events. For instance, it was said that Maria Alejandra might have committed another serious crime against people in 2012. All this leads to suspicions that the accused might have had help from her father, who would be an accomplice in covering for her and diverting public opinion. Over the years, he allegedly stripped the man of some of his assets, according to Mexican media. Thus, there are suspicions that, in reality, the La Fuente father and daughter were highly dangerous criminals. However, justice did not establish any decisive line of investigation in this regard. After an 8-year wait, on Monday, September 5, 2022, the General Prosecutor's Office of the Capital announced the sentence. For the crimes of qualified homicide and disrespect to corpses or human remains, Maria Alejandra La Fuente Casco was sentenced to 46 years and 6 months in prison, an unprecedented punishment in modern Mexican justice. After the firm conviction, she has no right to review the sentence or to alternative measures that relieve the prison sentence. She was also ordered to pay for the damage and funeral costs, and she lost her political rights. Maria Alejandra La Fuente was a calculating woman who seems to have taken advantage of her father's influence and protection to act freely and proceed against the men who, in some way, tried to save her from punishment for the assault she committed against her first husband, using an argument that portrayed her as a mistreated lady, probably making use of her great manipulation skills. Then, just 3 years later, she acted again, this time against her second husband. Acting with incredible cold blood, she planned the bloody end and even feigned insanity to once again avoid being held responsible for her actions. But this time, she had gone too far. Nothing could save her from being harshly sentenced by justice. The Whitaker family was a family like no other. The father, named Kent, owned a business in the construction area, which he had also inherited from his parents. It was a well-established business of several generations, doing very well economically. Patricia, the mother, was a school teacher, but decided to retire from work when she had her first child and dedicated herself to taking care of her son. Their first son, the eldest, was named Bart, and a couple of years later, they had another boy, Kevin. These two children were quite privileged. As their friends saw them, they were given everything they wanted, attended the best schools, and their house always seemed to be the place where everyone wanted to gather because they always had the latest toys and the latest movies. Their mother, Patricia, was always there taking care of them, and having been a school teacher, she had a lot of empathy with children, so the kids felt very happy at home. As money was never a problem for them, they focused more on their children doing what made them happy. What fulfilled them? Bart, the eldest son, shared his passion for cycling with his father from a very young age, which meant they spent a lot of time together, always fixing their bikes and going on rides. The relationship between the two brothers was also quite good, quite close. although everyone described them as polar opposites. The older brother, Bart, was more extroverted, more of a joker, somewhat more rebellious. Kevin, on the other hand, was much calmer. Everyone said he seemed more attached, more thoughtful, sensitive, and generally more considerate. This difference, instead of separating them, seemed to bring them closer together, complementing each other. Since both were quite popular with their respective groups of friends, there didn't appear to be any competition between them. Life for them seemed almost perfect. Their parents never fought, at least not in front of them. They had no major problems. Both children were well educated, well fed, and didn't suffer any violence or abuse at home. Their neighbors said they were the kind of family you set as an example for your own, the kind of family you aspire to have one day. In 2003, Bart, the eldest son of the Whitaker family, was 23, and his younger brother, Kevin, was 19. Both were university students. On December 10th, Bart excitedly called his parents. He had aced his final exams and was graduating with honors. Overjoyed, the family decided to dine out for a special dinner. They gathered at their home first, where Bart received a coveted Rolex watch as a graduation gift. The family then piled into the father's SUV and headed to Bart's favorite restaurant. The evening was filled with joy, captured in photographs taken by Bart's father, but the cheerful atmosphere was short-lived. Upon returning home, Kevin, the youngest, was the first to step out of the SUV and head towards the house. Just as he reached the stairs inside, he was shockingly shot in the chest. Patricia, standing in the doorway, was also shot in the chest. Kent, following behind, was hit in the arm, causing him to fall outside the house. Meanwhile, Bart, who had returned to the SUV for his cell phone, heard the gunshots. He hurried into the house and encountered an assailant in a balaclava, whom he believed to be African American, fleeing through the kitchen's back door. In the ensuing chaos, Bart was shot in the arm, but managed to avoid more serious injury. The attacker escaped. Bart, now in the living room, frantically dialed emergency services, not realizing a neighbor had already called them. By the time of Bart's call, the entire family had been attacked. As police and ambulances were dispatched, a concerned neighbor, hearing the gunshots, rushed over. He found Kent outside, gravely injured but conscious, and quickly fashioned a tourniquet from his shirt. Approaching Patricia, all she could utter was, "He shot us," before succumbing to her injuries and being unable to speak further. The neighbors stayed by their side until help arrived. Tragically, young Kevin was pronounced dead at the scene, a heartbreaking end to what began as a night of celebration. In the wake of the tragic shooting, Patricia, gravely injured, was airlifted to the hospital. Sadly, her injuries were too severe, and she passed away before they could reach the hospital. Meanwhile, Kevin and Bart, the eldest son, both wounded in the arm, were rushed to the hospital by ambulance. Thankfully, they were conscious and alert, their conditions not life-threatening. The crime scene was a hive of police activity as investigators tried piecing together the events of that fateful night. Initially, it looked like a robbery gone horribly wrong. A lone glove lay outside, a haunting clue, and inside, a gun, the instrument of the night's horror, was found on the kitchen floor, close to where Bart had been shot. The story took an unexpected turn the following day. Reporter, delving deeper into Bart's claimed university graduation, made a startling discovery. Bart was not enrolled at the university and was far from graduating. This revelation, once passed to the police, added a complex layer to the investigation. In the hospital, detectives confronted Kent with the news of Bart's academic deception. Surprisingly, Kent's reaction was one of calm acceptance rather than shock or grief. despite the tragedy that had struck his family. The police then turned to Bart, seeking an explanation for his lies. Overwhelmed by academic pressure and fearful of disappointing his high-expectation parents, Bart confessed to fabricating his educational success. Amidst this turmoil, the community gathered to mourn Patricia and Kevin's passing. The funeral service, attended by over 1,000 people, reflected the family's standing in the community. Friends of Kevin shared heartfelt tributes, painting a picture of a generous and beloved individual. Bart, too, was a focal point of these tributes, often hailed as a role model by his younger brother. As the investigation progressed, the initial theory of a burglary unraveled. Despite the presence of cash and valuables in the house, nothing was missing, steering the investigation towards more personal motives behind the tragic incident. The detectives, piecing together the chilling events at the Whitaker home, noticed something odd about the master bedroom. The drawers were all slightly open. It was as if someone had peeked inside, but didn't rummage through. Curiously, nothing seemed missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if the attacker knew exactly when the family would return, a suspicion further fueled by the precise nature of the shooting. 4 shots were fired in the dark house, each hitting a different family member, with 4 shell casings found at the scene. It seemed the assailant either knew the layout of the house well or was an exceptionally skilled shooter. The gun used in the shooting, found on the kitchen floor, bore no fingerprints, just a partial palm print, not enough to identify anyone. When they traced the gun's registration, it was linked to Kevin, the younger son who was already deceased. He had kept the gun in a safe in his room, which had been forcefully opened. Intriguingly, the master bedroom, where valuable items were stored, was left untouched. Instead, the focus was on Kevin's room, where the safe was cracked open to retrieve the gun. This indicated that the assailant was searching for something specific and knew exactly where to find it. The only item missing from the house was Bart's cell phone, which he had dropped during the chase and the assailant had picked up. The investigation took a turn when a friend from Bart's past reached out to the police. This friend revealed a shocking plot. 2 years earlier, in 2001, Bart had solicited him to murder his family in exchange for payment. The plan detailed by the friend mirrored the actual events that unfolded. Although the friend, Adam, had an alibi for the night of the murders, the police were intrigued by the striking similarities between the planned and executed crimes. Adding to the complexity, Jennifer, another friend of Bart's, had overheard him and his roommate discussing a similar plot. Alarmed, she confronted Bart, who ambiguously brushed off her concerns. Despite Jennifer's subsequent report to the police and their conversation with Bart's parents, the matter was not pursued further, partly due to the parents' trust in their son. Following their discharge from the hospital, Bart and his father, Kent, returned to live in their house. Despite the police's concerns for Kent's safety, he remained steadfast in his belief in Bart's innocence. Noting Bart's exemplary behavior and newfound religious devotion since leaving the hospital, the mystery deepened around Bart's involvement in the crime. Detectives couldn't shake off their suspicions, especially recalling his previous attempt to plot a similar crime with his friend Adam. They started digging into Bart's current circle, zeroing in on 2 names: Chris, his roommate, and Stephen, a neighbor. Both young men were known for their carefree lifestyles, lacking stable jobs and clear future plans. When the police questioned them, both Chris and Stephen staunchly denied any involvement in the crime. In an unconventional move, the detectives asked for DNA and scent samples from the duo. They used a sterilized gauze soaked in distilled water to capture their scents. These samples were then lined up alongside others, including the suspected ones. His scent detection dog was employed, first introduced to the scent of the gun, drawers, and glove from the crime scene, and then to the lineup of scent samples. Remarkably, in all 3 tests, the dog matched the scent on the crime scene items to Chris's scent. However, this type of evidence wasn't enough to hold up in court, and detectives knew they needed more to build a solid case. As they delved deeper, detectives found that the robbery scene didn't add up, and Bart's lie about attending university only cast more doubt on him. They even tapped the phone lines of Chris and Stephen, hoping to catch something incriminating. Bart, for his part, seemed cooperative during police interrogations and even participated in a reenactment at the crime scene, but his accounts were vague and unconvincing. In a twist, the police got Adam, the friend who had revealed Bart's 2001 murder plan, to call and blackmail Bart. In that call, Bart neither confirmed nor denied his involvement, but agreed to pay Adam $20,000 to keep silent. Later, Adam received $250 in cash from Bart, and the police found Bart's fingerprints on the envelope, further linking him to the crime. 7 months after the murders, in July 2004, Bart told his father, Kent, he was going out with friends. The next morning, with Bart nowhere to be found, a worried Kent contacted the police. They discovered Bart's truck abandoned outside some apartments, far from his home, with the engine still running. This strange occurrence, coupled with the fact that Bart had stolen $7,000 from Kent, started to turn Kent's belief in his son's innocence. The police, not letting up, increased pressure on Chris and Stephen. They conducted extensive interviews with their families and acquaintances, keeping the investigation active. Their persistence paid off a year later. Unable to live with the guilt, Stephen came clean to the police, confirming their suspicions. He confessed that Bart had orchestrated the murder of his family, motivated by the prospect of inheriting everything if his younger brother was also eliminated. Bart had promised a share of the inheritance to both Chris and Stephen, though he never specified an amount. Stephen revealed that while he didn't enter the house and only acted as the getaway driver, Chris was the one who went inside and executed the shootings. Stephen also admitted that he was initially reluctant, but was coerced into the plan. The final piece of evidence surfaced when the police, 18 months after the crime, discovered a backpack thrown into a lake by Stephen and Chris. Inside the backpack were items linking them to the murders: a chisel with blue paint matching the forced open safe, bullets identical to those used in the crime, a matching glove to the one found at the crime scene, a partially empty water bottle of Chris's DNA, and 2 cell phones registered in Bart's name, used for communication during the crime. After the shocking confession from Stephen, the police quickly arrested Chris and Stephen. But the saga took another twist 8 days later, on September 15, 2005. A Mexican man named Rudy Rios, lured by a $10,000 police reward, made a call that would crack the case wide open. Rios confessed he had sold his identity to Bart for $3,000 and had even helped him escape to a small town on the Mexican border. There, Bart, funded by the stolen money from his father, blended into the local life. He rented a room, became a regular at the local church, made new friends, and even found a girlfriend. Her family, owning a furniture business, unsuspectingly welcomed him, believing his fabricated tale of being an injured military deserter from Afghanistan. Rios, eyeing the reward money, gave the police detailed information on Bart's location, leading to his arrest by Mexican authorities for illegal residence. He was then handed over to the U.S. police to face trial for the grim events of December 10th. On that fateful night, Bart orchestrated a dinner outing under the pretense of celebrating his false university graduation. He needed his family to leave and return home together, setting the stage for the planned attack. At the house, Bart casually took photos with his family, even making an obscene gesture in one, a haunting detail given the impending doom he knew was coming. Bart maintained a calm face at the restaurant, later describing himself as feeling numb. Meanwhile, Chris, waiting in Bart's truck, accidentally dropped a glove, a critical piece of evidence later found by the police. Using the key and alarm code given by Bart, Chris entered the house, avoiding any signs of forced entry. He retrieved the gun from Kevin's safe and lay in wait. As the family left the restaurant, Stephen, stationed outside, gave Chris the signal. Stephen discreetly followed the family home, parking a block away to await the aftermath. Chris, following the plan, shot the 3 family members inside the house and then Bart in the arm to disguise him as another victim. Bart's subsequent call to emergency services included a misleading description of the attacker, further complicating the initial investigation. After the horrendous act, the 2 drove to a lake, their mission to dispose of a bag containing the damning evidence of their crime. Back at their homes, Chris and Stephen waited anxiously for Bart's call, expecting to discuss their payment for the grim deed. Yet the call never came, and Bart failed to deliver any form of compensation for their involvement. March 2007 marked the beginning of Bart's trial, where a series of startling admissions came to light. Bart confessed to plotting the murder of his family, not once but 3 times. His first attempt dated back to December 2000 with a couple of friends. Their plan failed when an attempted break-in triggered the house alarm, sending them fleeing. A few months later, Bart designed another plan with his friend Adam, which never materialized beyond mere talk, thanks to their friend Jennifer overhearing and reporting them. The third attempt, tragically successful, was executed with Chris and Stephen. Even after his parents uncovered the second plot, Bart, driven by a big desire to see his family dead, did not deter from his fatal intentions. During the trial, friends involved in the earlier, unsuccessful plans were granted immunity in exchange for their testimony against Bart. Despite Bart's claims of guilt and remorse, Stephen's testimony painted a different picture, revealing Bart's cold request to finish the job by killing his father in the hospital. Bart's duplicity extended even to his girlfriend's family in Mexico. He spun a web of lies, claiming he was an only child, unloved, with a mother who was a prostitute. Living under a false identity, he felt emboldened to fabricate this false narrative. In a disturbing revelation, his girlfriend testified that Bart, in a twisted attempt to comfort her during a family dispute, suggested they could kill her parents, a suggestion she thankfully did not take seriously. The trial, lasting a mere 7 days, concluded with the jury needing only 2 hours to declare Bart guilty. With the death penalty looming over him in Texas, Bart took the stand in his defense, pleading for his life and arguing against the capital punishment. The prosecution grilled Bart on the potential danger he posed to society. His defense: he claimed to have harbored hatred only towards his family. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced him to death. Bart's case was peculiar. There was no history of abuse from his parents. They were loving, supportive, and provided him with every opportunity, including luxury cars and a house for university. Despite receiving everything materially, Bart testified he felt unloved and blamed his family for the person he had become, seeking revenge for a life he resented. Bart's journey through the justice system was a tumultuous one, marked by repeated attempts by his lawyers to overturn his death sentence. Yet, each appeal hit a dead end, as the courts consistently denied them. Throughout this ordeal, Kent, Bart's father, remained a steadfast pillar of support. Despite the gravity of his son's crimes, Kent publicly forgave Bart, professing belief in his son's remorse and vowing to stand by him until the very end. As the years in prison passed, the inevitable drew closer for Bart. 11 years after his sentencing, his execution was scheduled for February 22, 2018. With the clock ticking down, Kent ramped up his efforts to save his son. He appeared on television programs and passionately pleaded with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, hoping for a miracle. In a dramatic turn of events just 2 days before the execution, the board, moved by Kent's unwavering advocacy, unanimously recommended clemency for Bart. However, the final word was in the hands of the Texas governor. On the day destined for Bart's execution, as the grim procedures commenced, a glimmer of hope emerged. Bart had his last meal and precious moments with his father, perhaps for the last time. But fate had a twist in store. 45 minutes before the execution, the governor granted Bart clemency, sparing his life on the condition that he would never challenge his new sentence: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Chris, the triggerman in the tragic saga, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years behind bars. Steve, the getaway driver who aided the prosecution, faced a relatively lighter sentence of 15 years due to his cooperation and has since been released from prison. Rosa del Carmen Verduzco was born in 1934 in Zamora, Mexico, into a wealthy and well-positioned family within the community. She and her 4 siblings received a good education due to their status. Money was not a concern for the Verduzcos, but something about this privileged reality troubled Rosa's mind. While she and her family could afford anything they wanted and enjoy a good life, thanks to her father's ability to run commercial businesses, other children faced harsher realities. This seemed unacceptable to her, and from the moment she became aware of it, a compelling need to make a change about the issue that bothered her was born. Even at a young age, she understood that it was up to her to make a difference. However, this task would not be easy, as she came from a strict family, and she knew it well. It was rumored among the inhabitants of Zamora that in her preteens, Rosa had fallen in love with a laborer, and her parents did everything possible to stop the progression of that relationship. At that time, Rosa had no choice but to accept her parents' order to distance herself from that man. Outraged by what she had to endure, she swore she would never marry, but she would have children. One day, while walking through the streets of her city, she met a boy slightly younger than her, who was 13 at the time, living in the open. Rosa felt she could not turn a blind eye and had to remedy the terrible situation the boy was going through, rescuing him from poverty. She took him to live in her house with her family, so he could finally rest under a roof and have a meal on the table. Her parents refused, considering her too young to face such a responsibility, but they eventually agreed to receive him due to her persistence. For time, this activity became a habit for Rosa, or rather, her passion. After a few months, the number of children living under her care had multiplied. Amidst this turmoil in the Verduzco household, her father passed away. Although this terrible event deeply affected Rosa, she saw it as an opportunity to fully pursue her dream. So then, she convinced her mother to buy her a house where she could shelter and help more children. On one hand, Rosa was just as young as her rescued children and also needed adult care, but on the other hand, she would no longer have to occupy her own space. This was how Rosa settled in her first home, but she experienced firsthand what it was like to live without money or food. Far from being an impediment, she went out to walk the streets of the city with the other children to earn their daily food. Her dream was coming true as more and more children arrived at the home under her wing. The shelter began to receive donations from residents and prominent personalities who were moved by Rosa's altruism, allowing her to gather the necessary funds to buy a larger plot of land and build a shelter with much more capacity, the same shelter that years later became known as La Grande Familia. Rosa Verduzco's work was quickly recognized by the population, who were inspired by her commitment and devotion to the care of minors, and consequently, donations soon appeared: food, school supplies, cleaning products, and money, among other things, made it possible to maintain the place that Rosa and her children built with their own hands. In 1947, La Grande Familia opened its doors, but it was in 1973 that the establishment became a civil association, not only receiving street children but also those whose parents could not maintain them due to various difficulties, or who were affected by substance abuse. Keeping them under a roof was one of the objectives, but the priority of the shelter was to provide them with the necessary education to allow them to be professional and independent individuals in the future. For this reason, they had an educational program including primary, secondary, high school, and even university extension careers, recognized and validated by the government. In addition to conventional training, the minors attended physical education classes, sewing workshops, and many more categories. However, one of the most outstanding and proudest for Rosa was musical learning. The children residing in the establishment had to learn to play an instrument or sing. Thanks to this, a large orchestra was formed that did not miss a celebration without presenting their musical number. La Grande Familia gained great popularity, reaching the ears of many politicians who decided to support and get involved in the project. Governors like Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderon, to name a few, became great admirers and allies of Rosa Verduzco. The work carried out there was so recognized that even during a visit by Queen Elizabeth of England to Mexico, she requested to meet Rosa Verduzco, in addition to donating a bus for transporting the children and money to build a gymnasium. Rosa agreed to the meeting, but added a condition to the Queen's request. She was willing to receive her if the children could be present at the venue and share a meal with her and the prince consort, as well as offer them a musical number. Rosa Verduzco made it happen. It was known that with her undeniable determination, she could achieve everything she wanted, and she had already proven it over decades. Thanks to that defining character, over the years, hundreds of children were welcomed into that home. All were received. However, as often happens in such cases, not everyone was very happy with her way of being. Rosa Verduzco faced controversies from the beginning of her project. One of the first reasons she was criticized concerned the location of the shelter, as it was located in an affluent area of the city. Her neighbors were not willing to share space with an establishment that, at first glance, looked deplorable, as it had been built by inexperienced hands, and occasionally some walls would crumble and had to be rebuilt. However, there were more terrifying reasons to judge what happened at La Grande Familia. Amid so much kindness and generosity seemed to hide a secret that only those behind those doors seemed to know, or at least someone that no one dared to tell, for fear of Rosa's reprisals. It was very common among the neighbors of the city to see her in the streets with a group of children. Some were sent to beg for money or sell newspapers to collect money. Meanwhile, others, the more privileged or at least chosen by her, accompanied her to have a chocolate she invited them to. But it was on these occasions that Rosa's authoritarian character became visible to those outside the shelter. In popular celebrations, when the town gathered in the streets, Rosa sent the children to ask for toys and authorized them to bite people who refused to give them anything. On the other hand, merchants or anyone who crossed her path were obligated to make some type of donation that Rosa demanded. The woman had the freedom to do and undo. It was evident that she had a power that exceeded her good intentions of running a home for children. Soon, the inhabitants of the city realized who this popular personality really was. She was greatly admired to the extent that parents threatened their misbehaving children with sending them to Rosa's place, as if that was the worst punishment they could receive. Everyone was aware and divided between those who praised her and those who hated her. However, what seemed unnoticed by the authorities was the actual happenings at the shelter, as no one dared to even visit the place occasionally to ensure it was operating according to governmental regulations. For 60 years, Rosa operated with perpetual impunity, aided by a corrupt system that delegated to one person the work others were incapable of doing. But the truth hidden beneath her kindness and generosity was unmasked in July 2014, after receiving more than 50 complaints from people external to the shelter and survivors of that hell. The Attorney General's Office of the Republic intervened at La Gran Familia to begin an intense search. Families of people who had been through the place and those who had experienced the mistreatments recounted to authorities about extreme conditions of insalubrity, carnal abuses, physical punishments, and deprivation of freedom. During the search at La Gran Familia, the police confirmed the huge amount of spoiled food that was provided to the children, which consequently led to severe cases of malnutrition. Among the testimonies, a survivor recounted being forced to eat flies just to get something in his stomach. Furthermore, other horrifying confessions reported that an endless number of crimes occurred there, threatening the integrity of the children, with numerous cases of abuses perpetrated by the same teachers or caregivers of the shelter. Some stated that within the establishment, there were many pregnant women who, after being forced to give birth, had their children taken away and registered under the Verduzco surname, thereby depriving the mothers of any rights over their babies. Thousands of children were adopted by Rosa Verduzco, despite its illegality, and worse yet, nobody stopped her from committing the crime. On the contrary, it was allowed. What Rosa did next with those children is even more heinous. Having legal custody of the adopted people allowed her to keep them away from their families until they reached adulthood. Whenever their relatives tried to visit them, they were violently expelled from the institution. But later, when they were supposedly able to finally go out into the world as restored individuals, Rosa demanded an exorbitant sum of money in return, as she had authority over them, effectively finding under that excuse a way to traffic people. It was impossible for these families to gather the demanded sum, so some never managed to leave. Moreover, if they tried to escape, they faced brutal beatings and confinement in cells, to the point that one of the victims reported that after a failed escape attempt, their ears were cut off as punishment. What had once been a shelter had ultimately become a prison. Long list of testimonies exposed the tortures and crimes committed within La Gran Familia. At the time, the Attorney General's office witnessed firsthand the deplorable state of the facilities. Children sleeping in broken bunk beds among trash, rats, and bed bugs, completely dirty bathrooms, and terrible infrastructure. The nauseating odor emanating from the place could be felt from the street, with excrement, urine, and decomposing food revealing the reality that was lived there. It was evident that the place was neglected, and the money from donations was not being used for improvements. These findings cast doubt on the benevolence that had positioned Rosa Verduzco as a legend, a saintly figure in Mexico and the world for decades. Thus, finally, on July 15, 2014, the 81-year-old woman and 6 of her assistants were arrested. Meanwhile, more than 600 people living there, including minors and adults, were rescued from the precarious conditions. Despite all the evidence against her, Rosa Verduzco was released without any charges due to her delicate health condition. The burden of pre-existing illnesses, such as diabetes and heart problems, led to physical and cerebral deterioration, requiring her to be hospitalized. While outside the building, a crowd gathered to pray for her speedy recovery. Others protested against the justice system's decision for not acting in accordance with the reported evidence. Finally, 2 years later, at the age of 84, after being hospitalized again for 20 days, Rosa del Carmen Verduzco passed away due to a sudden stroke. As for the other accused, out of the 6, only 2 were charged with the crimes committed. The others were released just like Rosa. In 2016, 2 years after the discovery of the truth, the Attorney General's office declared itself incompetent to follow up on the investigation into the case, deciding to leave it in the hands of the state. To everyone's surprise, the case remained unresolved, without any resolution, and much less any detainees paying the sentence they deserved for the committed crimes, including deprivation of liberty, the abuse suffered by the children, and the trafficking of them, among other horrific acts. The nickname "The Boss" was not given to Rosa randomly. It was her political contacts who called her that due to her decisive character, her authoritarian personality, and her ability to run a business of such magnitude. What never became clear was how a person with such a strong vocation for service from an early age turned into such a sinister figure, forgetting the true reason why she was there. Some theories suggest that she was involved with Mexican cartels and that La Gran Familia was an ideal place for money laundering. Others believe her ties with politicians personally benefited her, and in exchange for those favors, she forced people to vote for her allies. Indeed, there were those who claimed she was an ambitious woman, extremely strict, who enjoyed others suffering and having control. The reality is that today, the population is divided between those who choose to believe in her good intentions, considering her a saint in life, and those who assert she was one of the most evil people in Mexican history. This contradiction has sparked discussions, even among renowned personalities in culture and politics. What cannot be forgotten is that once again the judicial system has been incapable of providing a certain response to a population that for years hoped the truth would be revealed, and that when it finally happened, nothing changed. Nibaldo Villegas worked as a computers teacher in the Valparaiso region of Chile. Everyone who knew him said he was a kind man who loved to help. He had many friends, both within and outside his work environment, and enjoyed socializing, often meeting up with relatives and friends. However, he never neglected his job. In 2009, when Nibaldo was 41, he met Johanna Hernandez, a 23-year-old woman studying at the same university where he taught. Johanna was going through a tough time, having just ended a relationship with her boyfriend since she was 15, with whom she had 2 children. Nibaldo was like a beacon of light for her. In December of that year, they started a relationship, and both their lives improved. Nibaldo and his family welcomed Johanna's children as if they were their own. After getting married, Nibaldo built a house with his own hands for them to live together and be happy. Their greatest joy came when Johanna gave birth to a daughter, their first child together. For 8 years, the relationship faced no major problems, and Nibaldo's professional life continued to prosper. Motivated by him, Johanna continued her nursing technician studies. When they did argue, Nibaldo preferred to go running, and upon returning, after both had time to reflect, they would talk in their bedroom and resolve their differences. But good things don't last forever. In 2018, their arguments became constant. Johanna started reacting differently to problems, becoming physically and emotionally violent. Nibaldo tried his usual approach of walking away and returning when she was ready to talk, but Johanna had changed. Her mood would shift rapidly, leaving Nibaldo with no time to leave. Things escalated to the point where Johanna, during an argument, started throwing things around and declared the relationship over. Nibaldo agreed to end the relationship but was concerned about her reactions. He went to the police station and filed a domestic violence report, fearing for his daughter's safety. Although the police dismissed the complaint, Johanna took it seriously, and a big dispute ensued over the house and custody of their daughter. Due to Johanna's violent outbursts, Nibaldo sought full custody. The family completely broke down, stopped living together, and Nibaldo filed for divorce, only seeing each other through lawyers. Eventually, the courts ruled for shared custody, which Johanna did not accept well. She began harassing Nibaldo, demanding the house he had painstakingly built. On one occasion, she showed up at the university parking lot and threw stones at his car. Nibaldo maintained his composure, not wanting to worsen the situation or make his daughter uncomfortable, and eagerly awaited the finalization of their divorce for a change. August 10, 2018, was an important date for Nibaldo, his 50th birthday. He spent most of the day with his daughter, but went to his parents' house in the evening. He left his daughter with them as he was dining with friends and promised to return soon to put her to bed. The grandparents were happy to take care of her and spent quality time with her for several hours. However, when bedtime came, Nibaldo didn't show up. They tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for Nibaldo, who was always attentive when his daughter wasn't with him. They decided to go to their son's house. On arrival, they noticed something suspicious. Nibaldo's car was parked in front. They entered the house and saw the house keys on a table, along with the jacket their son had been wearing when he left his daughter before dinner. However, what struck them most was a shattered glass on the floor. They hurried upstairs to Nibaldo's bedroom, fearing what they suspected. Their son was nowhere to be found, and their alarm grew. That same night, Nibaldo's parents went to the police station to file a missing person report. The search operation began immediately, involving friends, university acquaintances, and even neighbors, but no one knew where Nibaldo was. When Johanna was interrogated, she stated they hadn't seen each other for a long time due to their separation and appeared extremely distressed about his disappearance. Days later, Johanna showed up at Nibaldo's house, which his brother was staying at, carrying a large bag. She declared she would stay as long as she wanted, claiming it was her house too since they were still legally married. This seemed odd to the brother, knowing the couple had ended on very bad terms. To the Villegas family's surprise, Johanna became increasingly involved in the search for Nibaldo, posting on Facebook and giving interviews where she tearfully pleaded for her estranged partner's return. For 5 days, the country was gripped by the search for the missing teacher, until a boat brought an answer. On August 15 of that year, workers at the pier near Valparaiso, while performing their duties, spotted something alarming in the water. A human torso without limbs was floating in the calm sea. They immediately alerted the police. Once the authorities and forensic experts arrived, they determined it was a man between 30 and 50 years old. While they couldn't establish the identity yet, everyone thought the same. It had to be the missing professor, whose face had been all over the television for the past 5 days. On August 20, the Prosecution and Homicide Brigade of the Investigative Police confirmed that the torso belonged to none other than Nibaldo. The discovery made a strong statement. Nibaldo was a peaceful man, got along with everyone, and had never been involved in anything illegal. The perpetrator had to be someone from his close circle. As detectives began their investigation, Johanna was the first of Nibaldo's relatives to give a television interview, again crying inconsolably, urging the capture of the culprit. Unbeknownst to her, she was exposing herself. On the day the body was found, two men went to the police station, wanting to speak to detectives about what they had seen on the day Nibaldo disappeared. On the early morning of August 11, the two individuals headed to the beach, intending to go on a fishing trip. Although unfamiliar with the area, they were excited about the expedition. However, their enthusiasm waned when they got lost at sea in the dark. Just as they were losing hope, they saw distant orange flames. They approached the shore with their boat and noticed a bonfire. A man was trying to keep the flames alive, using branches, cloths, and other objects they couldn't identify. The fisherman approached to ask for directions, thinking he might be lost like them. They tried to engage in casual conversation, but the man barely responded, only telling them it wasn't a good area for fishing before turning his attention back to the fire. The fishermen found the situation odd, especially when they noticed a blue car parked a few meters from the bonfire, with a woman inside smoking frantically. The situation seemed highly suspicious, but with nowhere else to go, the fishermen decided to stay overnight for shelter from the cold. At dawn, the woman got out of the car and approached the man by the fire. They appeared unaware of the fisherman's presence, shared a kiss, and gave one last look at the bonfire before driving away without a word. Before leaving, the fisherman took a closer look at the fire and noticed a sharp knife among the flames. Although it seemed strange, they preferred not to investigate further. They didn't think about that night again, until days later when a human torso was found floating near where they had been, realizing they had accidentally witnessed a terrible crime. After hearing the fisherman's story, the police went to the beach. It was a secluded area, so the remains of the bonfire were still there. They discovered that the mysterious man wasn't just burning branches and cloths, but also human remains. Forensic experts confirmed these were the remaining limbs of Nibaldo. But the fishermen provided another crucial piece of information. They described the woman smoking in the blue car as dark-haired, with long, straight hair of a darker complexion and around 30 years old, the same woman seen crying on television. From that moment, the police began investigating Johanna as the primary suspect in Nibaldo's murder. The only question was the identity of the man with her. Days later, the police discovered that Nibaldo's credit card had been used to withdraw 35,000 pesos from an ATM at a gas station on the morning of August 11. Security cameras showed a man in black making the transaction. The victim's family recognized him as Johanna's current partner, Francisco Silva. Additionally, shortly after the body's identification, Johanna went to a real estate agency to inquire about the property registered to Nibaldo, which they had fought over countless times, and where she had moved after his disappearance. There was no doubt that both Johanna and Silva were guilty of the crime. Both suspects gave their testimony at the oral criminal court. They admitted to being part of the crime, but blamed each other for its execution. Johanna was the first to give her version. She said her relationship with Silva was extremely complicated. Since they started dating, he had been manipulative, controlling what she wore, who she associated with, and even encouraged her to sign a prenuptial agreement. Silva's violence was not only reflected in his relationship with Johanna, but also in his strong feelings towards Nibaldo, seemingly driven by jealousy. After Nibaldo tried to gain full custody of the daughter he shared with Johanna, she came home crying. This intensified Silva's hatred, who said he would make Nibaldo disappear someday. The week before, on August 10, 2018, Silva arrived at Johanna's house with a jar containing a blue powder, instructing her not to ask questions and indicating he would have orders for her during the week. Accustomed to obeying Silva, Johanna agreed. On the Friday of Nibaldo's birthday, Francisco Silva contacted Johanna, instructing her to meet him to celebrate and detailed the steps to follow. That night, Johanna arrived at the house of Nibaldo. He greeted her, hoping for reconciliation. Johanna brought sushi and a drink for dinner, but she omitted a crucial detail. The drink was laced with clonazepam. 10 minutes after sitting down to eat, Nibaldo began to doze off. Once he was completely unconscious, Johanna took him to his bed, snapped 2 photos, and sent them to Silva, completing her part of the plan. Silva then entered the house, changed into black clothing, and headed to the room where Nibaldo was carrying a knife. Minutes later, he came downstairs and informed Johanna that he had mutilated Nibaldo. He gave her gloves to clean the blood in the room and a trash bag for the limbs. While disposing of the body, Silva ominously warned Johanna that no matter what happened, she must not accuse him, or he would ensure she was seen as the true perpetrator. They then drove to the beach, where they'd burned the limbs and clothing in a bonfire and tossed the torso into the sea. However, Silva's version was somewhat different. He not only denied Johanna's accusations, but also portrayed her as a violent person, prone to destructive outbursts when angry. According to him, Johanna used her tantrums and intimacy to manipulate him. He mentioned the prenuptial contract as a joke, inside gag after watching the movie 50 Shades, which she exploited to her advantage. The worst crisis came when Nibaldo wanted full custody of their daughter. Johanna swore she'd never forgive him and was ready to murder him. Seeing how upset Johanna was, Silva felt it was his duty as a man to do something about it and decided to do whatever she asked. Days later, Johanna requested he buy 30 clonazepam pills and grind them, which he did. The main difference in Silva's story was that on Friday, August 10, they were to follow their usual routine of having a barbecue, drinking, and sleeping in his car at the beach. However, when he picked Johanna up from her mother's house, he learned she had a different plan. She said they needed to stop by Nibaldo's to discuss their daughter. Once there, Johanna asked Silva to wait at a nearby place and wait for her instructions. He agreed. At 1 a.m., Silva woke to 3 WhatsApp messages from Johanna, 2 photos of an unconscious Nibaldo in bed, and a 3rd message asking him to come get her. Arriving at the house, Johanna was frantic, explaining she had drugged Nibaldo with clonazepam before attacking him with a knife. The problem was that while she was stabbing him, Nibaldo woke up, and his pleas could be heard from the bedroom. Johanna instructed Silva to finish the murder, handing him a sharp knife. Silva went upstairs and fatally stabbed Nibaldo in the thoracic area. Immediately after, Johanna asked Silva to help her dismember the body to make it easier to hide. The rest of the story, involving the movement and concealment of different body parts, was exactly the same in both their accounts, seemingly the only aspect they both wanted to take responsibility for. The methods of the murder and the locations where the body parts were found matched in both stories. What differed was the principal perpetrator, as each one aimed to receive a lesser sentence. They also agreed in their statement that the murder was not premeditated. However, the prosecutors argued that the crime seemed meticulously planned, given how it was executed. Technology experts located both of their cell phones at Nibaldo's house at the time of his death, and both had photos of the unconscious man in bed, implicating Johanna and Silva equally in the eyes of justice. The prosecutor stated that Johanna was the material author of the crime. Francisco Silva was convicted as the material author of qualified homicide. Both had the aggravating factor of treachery, which occurs when the perpetrator uses means or ways to eliminate all the victim's possibilities of defense. In Nibaldo's case, the means was the substance that rendered him unconscious. On May 16, 2019, the criminal court informed the sentence for both defendants, receiving the maximum possible penalty. Johanna was sentenced to life imprisonment. meaning she must serve 40 years before being eligible for penitentiary benefits. Silva was sentenced to simple life imprisonment, meaning he could opt for penitentiary benefits after 20 years. Johanna's defense requested a reclassification of the sentence, arguing she had collaborated with the investigation. They also sought to annul the aggravating factor of treachery, claiming there was no proof of Cloma's pen administration. Silva's lawyer also tried to reduce the sentence by claiming active participation in the investigation. Fortunately for the victim's family, both requests were denied. About 100 people gathered outside the court, celebrating with intense banners, but while citizens unrelated to the crime celebrated, the families involved in the case were left shattered. The Villegas family's lawyer stated that while they were satisfied with the sentence, Nibaldo's siblings would seek an update in the law, advocating for harsher penalties in dismemberment cases. Without the complete body of the victim, they couldn't give a dignified burial. Johanna's father also spoke about the crime, saying she had always been manipulative and violent, but worsened after meeting Francisco Silva. He agreed with her sentence and said he would never forgive her. In other interviews, he recalled Nibaldo's good character and expressed that he would always consider him part of the family, often visiting his grave with flowers. After the trial, Johanna and Silva were transferred to a penitentiary complex, where their troubles did not end. In prison, Johanna gained a high status for having ended her husband's life, instilling fear in most of the other inmates. Silva, on the other hand, was completely isolated, only going out to the yard when other inmates were not there. His situation only worsened over time. He went on a hunger strike for several days and wrote a letter to the National Human Rights Institute and the Court of Appeals, requesting a reduction in his sentence. When his plans did not work, Silva tried to contact Johanna, telling her he had spoken with a lawyer and was trying to reopen the case. His plan was for Johanna to claim she was the murderer so he would be seen as an accomplice. According to him, this would frame the crime as a momentary act of violence and might reduce their sentences for lack of premeditation. Johanna refused outright. Enraged, Francisco threatened her, claiming he had contacts who could harm her at any time. Eventually, Johanna filed a complaint for murder threats with the public ministry, which could play in her favor as it portrayed Silva as manipulative and conspiratorial, just as she had described him in her version of the events. As a result, the only measures taken against Silva were the confiscation of his cell phone and his transfer to a high-security cell. He was also barred from receiving family visits. While the murderers continue their lives in prison, Nibaldo's family is still fighting for him to rest in peace. They submitted a request to amend the penal code. The proposal, named Nibaldo's Law, aimed to add a clause to more rigorously penalize dismemberment or damage to a corpse, increasing the sentence for perpetrators by 3 to 5 years. If enacted, this law would not be retroactive and would not change the sentences for Nibaldo's murderers, but it would apply to future cases. The Villegas family might never be able to give Nibaldo a dignified burial, but they could prevent other families from suffering the same pain. In March 2022, the law was unanimously approved by the Senate and is currently being debated in the Chamber of Deputies. If it passes, it will only need the executive's approval to be officially promulgated. The Villegas siblings continue to carry this fight on their shoulders. Nothing will bring Nibaldo back, but they are doing everything possible to make the world a fairer place.
Lee Bennett was born on April 12, 2002, in Georgia, USA, into a family beset by conflicts. To understand the environment she was born into and lived in during her short life, we must understand her mother, Charity Lee. Her life was fraught with challenges from a young age, marked by tragedy and later struggles with substance abuse and problematic relationships. Charity was born on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, to Killa Bennett and James Robert Bennett Jr. A defining moment in her childhood occurred when she was just 6 years old. Her father, a 37-year-old trucking company owner, was fatally shot in a violent attack inside their home in an exclusive residential area of Atlanta. He was found with multiple gunshot wounds to his head, chest, and back. The police reported that he was alone at the time of the crime and that there were no signs of struggle at the scene. Initially, authorities suspected organized crime. However, the aftermath of James's funeral brought a shocking development. Charity's mother, Kayla, then 29, became the prime suspect in his murder. The charges were laid just 3 days after the couple, previously divorced, had remarried in Las Vegas. Evidence against Kayla included details like the unlocked doors of their home and her status as the primary heir to the trucking business. Additionally, the patrol officer who transported Kayla post-arrest noted that she occasionally exhibited satisfaction in her demeanor. During the trial, evidence was presented suggesting Kayla had been in contact with a truck driver and might have been involved in the crime. Despite this, the jury found her not guilty due to insufficient evidence, leading to her acquittal. The presiding judge described it as the most peculiar case of his career, given the variety of plausible angles and hypotheses. The controversy surrounding her father's death and her mother's high-profile trial deeply impacted Charity. During her mother's imprisonment, she was cared for by her maternal grandparents. Throughout her childhood and adolescence, Charity sought love and approval from her mother. In a desperate bid for attention, she intentionally turned to drugs, frustrated by her mother's apparent disinterest. At 17, Charity battled depression and heroin addiction, straining her relationship with her mother to the point of being kicked out of the house. With just $100 given by her mother, Charity faced a stark choice between rehabilitation and potential overdose. This money, however, became her lifeline as she chose to enter a rehabilitation center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She achieved sobriety for about a year, finding a place to live and enrolling in college. Nevertheless, her journey to sobriety was fraught with internal battles against her darkest demons. Nevertheless, during these difficult moments, she attempted to end her life on several occasions. At the age of 18, Charity became pregnant with her first child and at 3 months pregnant, decided she must definitively leave behind that dark stage in her life to become the best mother for her unborn child. That baby, whom she named Paris, became the motivation she needed to recover. She often said that her son had saved her life. When Paris Lee Bennett was born on October 10, 1993, in Abilene, Texas, Charity was alone because the father of the child had left her as soon as he learned of the pregnancy. Later, when Paris was 17 months old, his father returned to their lives. Charity recounted that it was clear the father was not well, having been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations. Paris was a very artistic and creative boy who enjoyed drawing, beginning at the age of 3. He was introverted, not very sociable, and reluctant to show affection to people he knew. The boy, who dreamed of becoming a paleontologist, was focused on his academic life. He studied a lot, had an IQ of 142, and never had problems at school. His performance was much higher than his peers, and his teachers considered him a unique child with potential and a promising future. After having her baby, Charity married twice, but neither union was successful. One marriage was with a man named Brendan, but the circumstances of their breakup were not disclosed. In her desire to form a family, Charity started a relationship with a man named Jonathan, and at the age of 28, she became pregnant with her second child, a daughter. The news filled the family with joy, but initially, Paris did not seem happy about his mother's pregnancy, which worried Charity. However, once his sister was born, things changed. Paris fell in love with his sister, showing affection, protectiveness, and attentiveness towards her. Paris did not have many friends, and his little sister was his playmate. She was a loving, kind, intelligent, and very determined girl. From a young age, she demonstrated a compassionate nature, even expressing a desire for her mother to adopt all of her children in the world. Her loved ones described her as a little girl with a strong personality, always speaking her mind. Over the years, the happy home that Charity dreamed of turned into a nightmare. Her partner had serious alcoholism problems and was a violent man. According to Charity, the relationship ended when her husband was stopped by a police officer, and when asked to exit his vehicle, he refused. The officer reached into the car, and the driver sped off, dragging the officer along. The officer then shot and injured him in the leg. When Charity learned about the incident, she decided she could not allow her children to live in such circumstances, and chose to separate. The young girl enjoyed her relationship with her brother, finding fun and inspiration in playing with him, seeing him as a role model, and wanting to follow in his footsteps. Paris also appeared to enjoy his time with his younger sister. Childhood videos and photographs showed them dancing, playing, and posing together, always smiling. In 2005, Charity and her children moved to Dallas, Texas, to be closer to Kyla, Charity's mother, who had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Charity was a loving mother, but the stress and anxiety from her partner's separation and disputes with her mother led her to relapse into drug use. During the 6 months that Charity was under the influence, Paris took on the role of the protective older brother, a situation that significantly changed his life. He no longer saw his mother as a loving figure, but as an unpleasant woman full of flaws and mistakes. Soon after, the three of them moved to Kyla's ranch in Seymour, Texas, where their lives became even more chaotic. It was during this time that a more emotionally unstable and violent side of Paris began to emerge. He had fits of rage, banging his head against the wall or throwing things on the floor to seek attention. However, Charity seemingly failed to interpret these signs. On one occasion, while living at Kyla's ranch, Paris broke a toy that his sister and a friend were playing with. Seeing this, Charity scolded and punished him. Minutes later, when his mother was away, Paris took a kitchen knife and ran out with it in his hand. Alarmed by the screams of one of the ranch workers, Charity and Kyla rushed to the scene and managed to disarm him after some struggle. Worried about her son and his violent outbursts, Charity took Paris to a psychiatric center. However, feeling that he was not given adequate attention, she decided to return home with her son. According to some accounts, there were other similar episodes later on. On one such occasion, Paris threatened his aunt and sister, leading Charity to take him again to a health center where he underwent various tests. The specialist told Charity that it was concerning for a child so young to have thoughts about harming others, recommending that she seek treatment for him. However, Charity did not take the psychiatrist's suggestions well, finding the evaluation erroneous and offensive, and disregarded the advice. Nonetheless, doubts about how to handle her son's situation lingered in her mind, and shortly after, the family moved to Abilene. Over time, Paris developed resentment towards his mother, leading to constant arguments between them. For Charity, although the changes in her son confused her, she didn't believe they were as serious as the psychologist had suggested. Unfortunately, she was mistaken. Then came February 4, 2007. That day, 13-year-old Paris was visibly upset with his mother from the morning. But as he was a teenager and fights between mother and son had become a daily occurrence, she didn't give it much thought. At that time, Charity was working at a well-known restaurant near Abilene and had hired a babysitter that day to help while she was at work. She thought she had faced worse things with Paris, and that, as in the past, everything would be resolved. So before leaving, she approached her son, kissed him, and told him she loved him. She had a demanding workday due to the Super Bowl. After midnight, around 12:30 a.m. on February 5, 2007, exhausted from the intense hours, Charity was cleaning tables at the restaurant, eager to finish her shift and return home to rest and see her children. That's when several police officers arrived at the establishment. As she went to find the manager, she heard her name mentioned in the office and felt terror. Confused and disoriented, she couldn't understand what was happening when an officer told her that her 4-year-old daughter was injured. Her immediate reaction was to ask what had happened and where her daughter was. Then, the officer informed her that her daughter had passed away. Unable to bear the shock, Charity fainted. There is nothing more terrifying for a mother than the death of a child. But the truth she heard from the police was much crueler and more painful than she could have imagined. While being taken by the police to the station, Charity asked about her son Paris, and an officer responded that they had him. This brief and stark answer made her realize her worst nightmare had come true. When she heard her daughter had died, she felt shattered. But learning that Paris was the perpetrator was like having those shattered pieces broken again. According to the police investigation, that night the babysitter had taken the kids out for Chinese food. They returned home and watched a children's movie. The little girl then went to her room to sleep, while Paris retreated to his because he had to finish his homework. It's unknown at what moment Paris decided to end his sister's life, but as a bright and manipulative teenager, around 10 at night, he managed to convince the babysitter she could go home, assuring her that his mother was on her way. With her absence, it would be easier for him to execute his plan. What happened once they were alone was a true scene of terror. Paris went to Ella's room, beat her, sexually abused the little girl, barely 4 years old, and suffocated her. Then, with a knife he had taken from the kitchen, he gave her 17 fatal stabs. Immediately after the attack, Paris picked up the phone and called a friend, engaging in a conversation about various topics. Roughly 2 minutes after ending this call, which lasted 6 minutes at 11:42 p.m., the teenager dialed 911. During the call with the emergency operator, Paris seemed desperate and distressed about the atrocious act he had just committed. When asked if the girl was bleeding, he admitted she was because he had inflicted several wounds on her. The operator instructed Paris to perform CPR while waiting for emergency services and provided the necessary directions. On the recording, Paris can be heard counting as if following the instructions, but investigators later concluded that he never attempted to revive her. This was deduced from the position of the little girl's body and the blood-stain patterns found at the scene. In an attempt to justify his actions, Paris told the operator that he had hallucinated and thought his little sister was a demon. Soon, the street outside was filled with police and paramedics. Paris was taken into custody and brought to the police station while the investigation began at their home. During interrogation, he again mentioned his demonic hallucinations, claiming he was sleeping with his sister and woke up to her face looking different, like a demon engulfed in flames. He said he thought she was possessed and attacked her in a panic attack. As Paris continued his account, however, he fell into contradictions. He mentioned feeling resentment towards his sister since her birth because he was no longer the center of attention. Initially, investigators thought jealousy might have motivated the attack, but then he revealed his original plan also included killing his mother when she returned home. After a long, confusing, and painful night, Charity arrived at the police station to see her son. The inconsolable mother was shattered but became emotional upon seeing Paris. She got up, hugged, and caressed him amid tears, showing him she was there for him. Paris's reaction, in contrast, was cold and emotionless. He simply sat and coldly asked her what she planned to do. When Charity broke down in tears asking what he meant, Paris reminded her that she had always said she could take someone's life if they harmed her children. His question was not out of fear, but rather a challenge. At that moment, Charity realized there was something very dark in her son. Following his arrest, Paris was charged with a murder but not tried as an adult, as the minimum age for adult prosecution in Texas is 14 years. Instead, he was charged in juvenile court and pleaded guilty to capital murder. Charity was left feeling confused and unsure of what to do next. Although Paris's defense team suggested he not plead guilty, for Charity, this was unthinkable. She couldn't hate her son and wanted him to be held accountable for his actions, yet she also desperately sought to understand what had driven him to such extremes. While the prosecution aimed for a life sentence, his lawyer was preparing to secure the lightest sentence possible. As part of their efforts, the defense advised against Charity receiving mental health counseling, fearing that the prosecution might use the reports against Paris. Despite the traumatic ordeal she faced as the mother of both the victim and the perpetrator, she finally accessed counseling 2 years after the crime. She was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and depressive disorders. Charity lost 15 kilograms in 13 days, started self-harming, and harbored a strong desire to die. Nevertheless, she knew she had to be strong for Paris, whom she never stopped loving despite the circumstances. In the months following, Paris was in complete isolation. He didn't speak and communicated only through letters and drawings. 2 months before his sentencing, Paris began to reject simple instructions and became more violent. On one occasion, he repeatedly hit a fellow inmate in the face and received a warning for making derogatory comments about other inmates. He later flooded his cell and confronted guards who came to see what was happening. During evaluations, he referred to the crime against his sister with a smile on his face. Prison staff reported that Paris repeatedly tried to manipulate them into giving him his mother's address. At one point, Texas Department of Justice officials said he had hacked the jail's computer system, though the intent was unclear. During this time, 2 psychologists evaluated Paris, and a third reviewed the case. Each report described the boy as showing marked antisocial behavior, reduced empathy, and remorse. The first specialist wrote that he had a moderate risk of developing traits characteristic of psychopathy and pathological narcissism. The second asserted that the teenager displayed all the characteristics of a psychopath. The third went further, suggesting to Charity that she change her identity and move somewhere Paris could never find her. Paris was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, which is the maximum sentence for capital murder in a Texas juvenile court. Had he been an adult, he would have faced the death penalty. Paris will be eligible for parole for the first time in February 2027. If he is never granted parole, he will be released in February 2047, by which time he will be over 50 years old. 2 years after his sentencing, Paris made chilling and macabre confessions about his motivations. He revealed that his original plan was to take the life of his mother, Charity, but after much thought, he realized he wanted to make her suffer in a way that killing her would not achieve. By taking away her young daughter, Ella, he knew Charity would suffer for the rest of her life. In 2013, 6 years after losing Ella, Charity became pregnant and decided to raise her new baby, Phoenix, on her own, despite still being devastated by the loss of her beloved Ella. Phoenix brought life, joy, and a renewed will to move forward back into her life. However, Phoenix's arrival was not without challenges. He was born with a defective heart valve and had to undergo open-heart surgery. Fortunately, he recovered successfully. When Paris learned of his mother's pregnancy, he sent her a letter expressing his happiness, even though he knew he would never be able to meet his half-brother in person due to legal restrictions preventing convicted felons from contacting minors under 17 years of age. This restriction was a relief for Charity, who never brought Phoenix to the prison. Although Paris and Phoenix never met in person, they talked over the phone when Charity called her eldest son. Despite trying to handle these interactions naturally, Charity always harbored the fear of doing something that might put Phoenix in danger from his brother. In 2013, at the age of 19, Paris was transferred to an adult prison. 6 years later, in 2019, he gained significant attention after an interview with journalist Piers Morgan. In the interview, a calm 26-year-old Paris claimed he never felt he achieved any goal by killing his sister. He expressed being completely different from the person he was at the time of the murder and acknowledged the deep hatred he once felt for his mother, though he admitted to harboring thoughts of committing a crime since he was very young.
Paris' story inspired documentaries revealing his manipulative and narcissistic personality. However, he consistently insisted that he was not mentally ill. For a long time, Charity visited and communicated with Paris through letters and phone calls. She shared her story with various media outlets, explaining that after her daughter's death, nothing made sense anymore, marking the end of the life she knew. Reflecting on the past, she regretted relapsing into drug use, believing it injured Paris, but she did not regret how she raised him. In 2021, Charity declared that she had ceased all communication with Paris. This decision came after learning he had become involved with a woman on bail living 2 hours from her home. Charity acknowledged that while she still loved Paris as her son, she did not like the man he had become. Following the tragedy, Charity established a foundation named Ella in honor of her daughter, which also stands for empathy, love, lessons, and action in English. Through this initiative, she advises families of both victims of violent crimes and offenders, having experienced both sides of such tragedies, first as a child when her mother was accused of her father's murder, and later as a mother when Paris committed his crime. Charity understands the profound impact violent crimes have on families. She feels that the best way to honor her daughter, Ella, is by helping others navigate adversity, regardless of which side of the story they are on. This foundation serves as a testament to her commitment to supporting those affected by violent crimes and creating a platform for healing and understanding. Charity's work aims to provide guidance and support to those facing similar challenges, helping them to find a path forward amidst the turmoil and pain caused by such life-altering events. After 13 years working, Charity decided to shut down the Ella Foundation to focus on her son, Phoenix.
Bobby Jamison and Sherilyn Jamison, despite some eccentricities, were a rather ordinary couple. They preferred to keep a distance from commitments and other socialization demands. The couple met in the summer of 2002 and quickly fell in love, marrying soon after. Sherilyn had a son, Colton, from a previous marriage, who got along well with Bobby. In 2004, their family expanded with the birth of their daughter, Madison Jamison. The Jamisons lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, where Colton had spent part of his childhood. However, in July 2009, Colton was sent to live with his father for unknown reasons. Life wasn't always easy for the Jamisons. Sherilyn had battled depression since her sister's death in a bizarre accident involving a bee sting on her tongue. She was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder and sometimes neglected her medication. Bobby faced his own challenges after a car accident left him with chronic debilitating back pain, preventing him from working. The constant pain and financial worries contributed to his depression as well. Their mental health issues began affecting their marriage, leading to arguments and discussions about possible divorce. The Jamisons were a reclusive family, often keeping their personal matters hidden from even those closest to them. Bobby and Sherilyn were deeply religious and engaged in spiritual practices, but they also harbored intense paranoia about spirits invading their home. They sought guidance from a preacher, sharing their fears with him. Sherilyn was particularly concerned about spirits communicating with their daughter, Madison, who talked to an imaginary friend named Emily. This behavior was likely Madison's way of coping with the family's chaotic environment. Bobby, worried about spirits on their roof, inquired about special bullets to eliminate them. He also possessed a satanic Bible, intending to use it for exorcising spirits from their home. The Jamisons owned a storage container on their Eufaula property, intending to use it as temporary housing while building their new home on a mountain. The container attracted attention from neighbors due to the unusual graffiti Sherilyn, who claimed to be a witch, sprayed on it. She believed her black cats were being poisoned and accused neighbors of the act, causing discomfort and leading them to avoid the Jamisons. Sherilyn's desire for solitude ultimately aligned with the neighbors' inclination to keep their distance. Feeling uncomfortable in their neighborhood and seeking a fresh start to possibly save their marriage, the Jamisons showed interest in a remote piece of land near Red Oak, about 30 miles from their home. On October 7, 2009, the family set out in their truck to see the land but got lost and stopped to ask for directions. Deciding to return home, they ventured back to the mountains the next day. The Jamisons, being a private family, often went weeks without contact with friends or relatives, so it wasn't unusual for them to be out of touch for over a week. On top of this, the family had informed Madison's school that they would be withdrawing her, as they were moving away, hence why the school never asked after her. 8 days after anyone had last seen or heard from the Jamisons on the 8th, hunters reported an abandoned truck on the top of Panola Mountain and reported it to police, who determined that it belonged to the Jamisons. The truck was locked, and it appeared that all of the family's possessions, including their dog Maisie, were inside. Maisie was miraculously still alive, but extremely malnourished, having not eaten for a number of days. Authorities freed Maisie from the truck, bringing her to live with Bobby's mother. When authorities began investigating the mysterious disappearance of the Jamison family, they learned that on October 8, 2009,
44-year-old Bobby, 40-year-old Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, were last seen by a man living in the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma. This sole witness informed the authorities that he saw only the family and no one else in the area during that time. At the time, the county sheriff told the press that the witness was a landowner in the Red Oak area and that they had searched the area but found no clues. Officially, the Jamisons were near this area to view a 16-hectare plot they intended to buy. Strangely, they planned to live on this land in the storage container they already owned on their property in Eufaula. Police discovered several personal belongings in the truck, including cell phones, Sherilyn's purse, and Bobby's wallet in the family's truck. Believing the family might be lost in the dense and treacherous woodlands of Panola Mountain, authorities utilized the GPS data from Bobby and Sherilyn's cell phones to trace their movements. The GPS trail led them up a hill where they found small footprints, presumably belonging to Madison. At the hill's summit, a photo of Madison was discovered on the cell phone belonging to Bobby. The picture sparked varying interpretations of her emotional state. Some observers suggested she looked on the verge of laughter, while others perceived her as close to tears. A theory emerged that someone other than her parents might have taken the photo, given her lack of smile and seemingly uncomfortable body language. However, the photo's significance as evidence is debatable, as discerning Madison's thoughts or feelings from the image is challenging. It's argued that a 6-year-old would likely not hide fear or fret, so if she felt intimidated by the photographer, her expression would probably clearly reflect fear, which is not evident in the photo. Authorities estimated that the family spent approximately 15 minutes at the mountain's peak before returning to their truck. This moment marks the beginning of the mystery, as their subsequent actions and whereabouts remain unknown. The following day, a large-scale search operation was launched, involving over 100 law enforcement personnel, volunteers, search dogs, and helicopters, but the family was not found. Further investigation of the truck revealed several intriguing clues. Hidden under the front seat was a bag containing $32,000 in cash. Additionally, an 11-page letter written by Sherilyn, filled with hostility and hatred towards Bobby, was discovered. The letter conveyed Sherilyn's feelings of neglect and indifference from Bobby towards his family. She criticized him for being a recluse and for not valuing his family, highlighting the strained dynamics within the household. Parallel to the on-site investigation, police followed essential steps in any missing persons investigation. They spoke with the couple's family and close circles, where they learned that the Jamisons had some peculiar traits. Friends reported that the family had begun acting strangely, and both Bobby and Sherilyn had lost a significant amount of weight before disappearing. The sheriff at the time speculated that the family might have been involved in drugs, although no evidence of this was found. There were also references to the couple's erratic behavior, seen moving objects to the vehicle in a way that seemed robotic or trance-like. Unfortunately, questioning those close to the couple only confirmed their atypical nature, but shed no light on the family's whereabouts. As months and then years passed without further leads, the case remained unsolved. The next discovery related to the case occurred in 2013, again reported by hunters. This finding would at least partially resolve the mystery of the Jamison family's disappearance. The hunters found the remains of 3 bodies, belonging to 2 adults and a child. The discovery of the remains occurred near where the Jamisons' vehicle was found in 2009, leading many to believe they belonged to the missing family. However, confirmation was needed. At the time, the sheriff was asked by journalists why the bodies were not found in 2009, despite the intensive search and the use of tracking dogs. She speculated that the bodies might have been covered by falling leaves, which could have caused rescuers to overlook them. Bobby's paternal uncle was the first family member to speak with the media. He explained that while it wasn't definitive that the remains were his nephew and his family, all evidence pointed to them. He had been contacted by the FBI about the discovery and said he had no hope that the family was still alive 4 years after their disappearance. For him, finding the bodies provided closure. Although it was sad because the reasons for their fate were unknown, he found it particularly painful that an innocent child had met such an undeserved end. Meanwhile, authorities warned that the process of identifying the bodies would take time. The county sheriff's office, the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the state medical examiner's office searched the area, but found no evidence to help identify the remains, as they reported in a joint statement. The spokesperson for the medical examiner's office said they received the skeletal remains of 2 adults and a child, and announced they would use pathological, anthropological, and forensic methods to determine if the remains belonged to the Jamison family. She clarified that identification could take days or even years, depending on the condition and preservation of the remains. Many months later, on July 3, 2014, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to the Jamison family. The forensic analysis of the bodies revealed no soft tissues, only partial skeletal remains due to significant scavenger and rodent activity at the site. Despite this, the bodies appeared to have been placed side by side and face down. Skulls were present, and although a small hole was found in Bobby's skull, possibly caused by a bullet, the state of decomposition meant the medical examiner could not determine a definitive cause of death. Since the Jamisons' disappearance, 5 theories have been publicized to explain their deaths, but none have been confirmed. The first theory suggests an accident, pointing to weather reports in the area at the time showing temperatures of around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. In the days following their disappearance, the area experienced heavy rains, but not enough to cause death. The bodies were found only 4 kilometers from their truck, raising the possibility that the family got lost in the woods and died of hypothermia and exposure. However, this doesn't explain why their truck was left as if they intended to return soon. The second theory proposes a scenario of murder followed by a suicide decision. It was known that both Bobby and Sherilyn suffered extreme stress throughout their lives. 11-page long letter was found in their truck, in which Sherilyn expressed her resentment towards Bobby, accusing him of being a hermit. Another letter found in their family home was said to mention death. Although Sherilyn's mother stated that writing such letters was common for her due to her bipolar condition, Sherilyn's gun was also missing from the car. This raised the question of whether Sherilyn could have walked 4 kilometers with her family to kill them and then take her own life. Police also investigated the theory that the Jamison family's deaths were a murder-suicide, but not by Sherilyn, instead by Bobby. According to this hypothesis, Bobby might have read his wife's resentful letter and decided to end everyone's lives. However, this theory weakens with the evidence, as no weapon was found near the bodies. This does not rule out the possibility of death by poison or other means. It's also unclear why they would have traveled so far from the truck to end their lives, especially since Bobby had mobility issues in his own home due to his injuries. The scenario of him walking 4 kilometers through mountainous terrain seemed improbable. Moreover, this does not explain why they were found lying face down, side by side. The third theory involves Bobby's father, 67-year-old Bob Dean Jamison, as responsible for the murders. It was revealed that in early 2009, about 6 months before the family disappeared, that Bobby had filed for a protective order against his father. He described his father as a dangerous man who thought he was above the law and had connections with prostitutes, gang members, and methamphetamine trafficking. Bobby also claimed that his father had threatened to kill him and his family on 2 separate occasions, once in November 2008 and again in April 2009. Bobby feared for their lives as his father had once hit him with a vehicle. Bobby had been involved in a dispute with his father, which resulted in Bob removing everyone except Madison from his will. The dispute stemmed from disagreements over a supposed deal between them. Bobby claimed he worked at his father's service station for free, under the understanding that he would inherit half of the business. But his father later said that agreement never existed. However, Bob died just 2 months after the Jamisons' disappearance and had been ill for some time. His brother Jack stated that Bob was either in a hospital or a nursing home at the time of the incident, and added that, although Bob was a disturbed person, he was not capable of being involved in the murders. The fourth theory is that the Jamisons were killed by a cult. Sherilyn's mother believed that the Jamisons were murdered by a religious cult in southeastern Oklahoma. According to her, the cult had violent members and had put Sherilyn on a blacklist. However, she never named a specific cult, and no evidence has been found to support this theory.
It has also been suggested that the Jamisons practiced witchcraft. Reports indicated that a witch's Bible was found in the family's home. However, Sherilyn's best friend Nikki stated that the supposed satanic book was purchased solely for the purpose of a prank.
Yet, Bobby's spiritual advisor mentioned that Bobby had confessed to reading the satanic Bible. This raises several questions about the theory of a cult-related murder. Why were the bodies found deep in the forest, and how did they get there? Were they forced to walk at gunpoint, or were they taken there after being killed? Transporting bodies 4 kilometers through dense forest would be challenging, suggesting the involvement of more than one perpetrator. The fifth theory relates to drug issues. Rumors suggested that Bobby's parents were involved in illicit substance trafficking, and some suspected that the family was involved in a drug deal gone wrong. The Jamisons' aforementioned strange behavior could be explained by drug influence. However, former sheriff stated that there was no evidence to support the theory of drug use or trafficking by the couple. Many have pointed out that Bobby and Sherilyn were good parents and would not have taken Madison with them if they were involved in a drug-related event. The fact that the bodies were found aligned and face down could suggest an execution-style murder. If so, was it premeditated? Who knew they would be in that remote mountain area at that time? And what was the motive? Alternatively, they might have stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen and were silenced. But again, why were they taken so deep into the forest? For time, when revisiting the case to find closure and a responsible party, a particular detail emerged. The bottle found in the Jamisons' vehicle. It was determined to belong to a former guest at the family's house who had been expelled for being the white supremacist. Sherilyn, who had Native American ancestry, had reportedly expelled him at gunpoint only a month before the disappearance. The dispute arose because the individual, whose identity remains confidential, expressed beliefs that all non-white people needed to die. While he seemed to have a motive for revenge, he provided a solid alibi and was ruled out as a suspect by the FBI. Rumors then circulated that the Jamisons were on the blacklist of a white supremacist group known as the United White Knights. The mountains where they disappeared were known as a hotbed for far-right extremists, and near where the Jamisons' truck was found, a vandalized car was covered with racist slogans. Sherilyn had supposedly been part of the group's missions, but had rewritten the messages with religious words of peace and love. Although white supremacists are active in the area, no concrete evidence has been produced to support their involvement in the case. Ultimately, all the theories remain speculative. To this date, what happened to the Jamisons on October 8, 2009 remains unknown, and unless someone who knows the truth comes forward, it will continue to be an unresolved mystery with limitless theories but very few answers. Sydney Loofe was born on August 21, 1993, in a small Nebraska town called Broken Bow. In 2000, her family moved to the city of Nilaya in search of other opportunities. From a young age, Sydney was known to be very good at fishing, which she loved. She also played volleyball and other sports at school, but unfortunately had to give them up due to developing scoliosis during her adolescence, a condition that affects the spine and causes an abnormal curvature to the sides, greatly increasing the risk of injuries during physical exertion. After finishing her high school studies in 2011, Sydney got a job at a hardware store and was able to move into a small apartment 3 hours away from her parents' home. According to her family, Sydney suffered from anxiety and had been struggling with severe depression. They were aware of this because, just a few days before her disappearance, Sydney had opened up about it, leading her parents to help her get an appointment with a doctor and even taking her to the consultation to be prescribed antidepressants in hopes of improving her situation. Unfortunately, that day would be the last time her parents saw her alive. As the investigation progressed in search of useful information, the police contacted friends and acquaintances of the missing young woman for clues about her possible whereabouts. Thanks to a friend of Sydney, they learned that the girl had met a young woman named Audrey on the Tinder app, who had agreed to a date on November 14, 2017. For that date, Sydney had asked if it would just be the two of them, to which Audrey affirmatively replied. The date between the two women was to take place in the basement of an apartment that Audrey had rented. Strangely, it seemed to go well, as that night Sydney returned to her apartment, and they planned another date for the next day. There were several pieces of evidence for this, as Sydney had even posted a photo on her Snapchat on November 15 with the caption, "Ready for my date," along with a heart emoji. Until that moment, this was the only information the police had about Sydney. She had taken the precaution of informing her friends that she was going out with an unknown person from Tinder whom she had been talking to for some time. Among these friends was a girl named Brooklyn McChrystal, who, upon learning of Sydney's disappearance, set out to gather information about the person her friend had gone out with to hand over to the police. For this, she decided to create a Tinder account and began searching through profiles in the area until she finally found one of a girl, also named Audrey, like the person who had gone out with Sydney. Brooklyn proceeded to like this profile and thus managed to make a match with this supposed Audrey, and they both started messaging until Brooklyn finally got Audrey to share her phone number. Once she had the number, Sydney's friend gave all the information to the police so they could start tracking the number and thus find the location of the suspect. This plan seemed unlikely to work, as many things could go wrong, but 2 days later, the authorities made a terrifying discovery. It turns out that when tracking Sydney's last phone movements before it lost signal, it was found in the same location as the phone number given by Sydney's friend. This left the officers no choice but to head to that location, leading them to the city of Wilbur, also in Nebraska, to a duplex apartment. On one side lived the owner, and on the other, a couple of tenants who immediately caught the officers' attention. The person renting the apartment was a 51-year-old man named Aubrey Trail, and his name was suspiciously similar to Audrey from Tinder, and the girl in these photos could perfectly be this man's girlfriend, a 23-year-old girl named Bailey Boswell. Despite all this, the police did not consider this couple as direct suspects, and for them, the possibility that Sydney was still alive was very high. For this reason, the visit they made to Aubrey and Bailey was routine and to leave no stone unturned. Upon arriving at the apartment and after knocking on the door several times, no one came out to greet them, so the officers asked the owner of the complex for help, who handed over the key, and they were able to confirm that there was no one at home. The only thing that caught the police's attention was that a penetrating smell of chlorine was coming out of this apartment, impregnating the entire place. The owner even told them that he had noticed this a day ago, and that because of that intense smell, a family member of the owner had vomited and developed a rash due to the potent chemical. He also mentioned that strangely, he had noticed that Aubrey Trail and his girlfriend had the air conditioning still running despite it being November, and temperatures being very low in Nebraska at that time of the year. The next day, the police returned to the apartment, but this time they were more prepared and armed with a search warrant to enter and inspect the entire place thoroughly. However, they found nothing. Everything seemed the same as the day before. The couple was still without any signs of having returned home, and the same chlorine smell continued to emanate from the basement. But there was nothing else that caught their attention at first glance, so they left the place and focused on continuing to search for the missing young woman in the surroundings of the city. 2 weeks later, and still with no news of Sydney, her disappearance became more popular in the media, and in the absence of new evidence indicating another path to follow in the case, the police issued a public statement classifying Aubrey Trail and his girlfriend as persons of interest and possible suspects. In response to this statement, the man and his partner made a live broadcast on Facebook, defending themselves against the police accusations and claiming they were both innocent. At the end of the broadcast, it can even be heard Aubrey saying, "I pray for Sydney to appear soon." 2 days later, the police arrested Trail and Bailey in a hotel in Missouri. Although this was for charges not related to Sydney's case, it turns out that the two earned their living by scamming antique stores and private businesses, defrauding people they also scammed. At the time of their arrest, according to police statements, the couple possessed maps, sleeping bags, and sports shoes, which appeared to be part of their tools for their plan to escape to Mexico. After this arrest for fraud, the police found an excuse to interrogate the two suspects about Sydney's case. At first, they did not say much, but Bailey confessed to being the owner of the Tinder profile identified as Audrey and confirmed that she had met with the girl on both occasions. According to her, the last time she saw Sydney was on November 15, after taking a ride in her own car while smoking marijuana, and then they left Sydney at a friend's house. After that, they did not exchange a single message. When the police asked where the friend's house was located, the young woman said she did not remember the exact location. She responded with monosyllables and refused to give any personal information about herself. Aubrey Trail also refused to make any statements during his arrest for fraud and the subsequent interrogation. After this, the FBI decided to get involved in the investigation of Sydney's disappearance. Bailey Boswell never had a father figure, as her father was absent when she was just a girl. Bailey was good at sports, so much so that in high school, she was the first on the list of the fastest runners, and for this, she was even once offered a scholarship to play basketball at the university. But all this promising future was ruined when she started having problems with substance abuse after graduation. Shortly after, she had a daughter and married a man named Freddie Pennell. Those who knew the dynamics of this couple describe it with terror, as this man was very aggressive, both physically and psychologically with Bailey. And he had such an extreme drug addiction that, combined with his violent attitude, social service authorities were forced to take their daughter from their home when she was still in her early school years. According to Bailey's mother, at one point, this man even hit and kicked her in the face while she was still pregnant. On the other hand, although it was hard to believe, Aubrey Trail had an even more complicated life than his partner. As a child, his parents were abusive to him in all possible ways, and Aubrey said he felt as if their greatest wish was for him to disappear. These mistreatments continued until his grandfather took over his upbringing. Sometime later, while still very young, Aubrey was forced to return to his childhood home, where he would again suffer abuse from his stepfather. Growing up in poverty, he had to move through various foster homes until, as a teenager, he ended up in prison after being convicted of armed robbery. On his release, he began looking for different ways to make a living, avoiding traditional employment. Scams became a part of Aubrey's daily life. He primarily defrauded antique shops by selling them fake objects purported to be ancient, and he also got involved in thefts whenever the opportunity arose, among other illegal activities. This was Aubrey's lifestyle, when one day while browsing a website, which was a classifieds page where implicitly many people sold their bodies, he contacted Bailey Boswell. Aubrey was on this page looking to connect with a female, and Bailey was supposedly there looking for a sugar daddy. This is how these two, with a 28-year age difference between them, began their relationship and moved in together to the apartment Aubrey had rented in the city of Wilbur. As the FBI gathered all this information about the suspects' past, while they remained under arrest for their fraud schemes, and during the interrogation process, neither was willing to provide additional information about the possible whereabouts of Sydney. They maintained their innocence regarding any crime related to her, but this would change when a very chilling discovery was made. On December 4, 2017, a search team from the local police department, led by the FBI, found parts of Sydney's body discarded in trash bags on a dirt road north of Nebraska, approximately an hour's drive from the city of Wilbur, where the two suspects lived. Along with Sydney's body, adult toys and artifacts were found, discarded using the same bags in which the young woman's body was wrapped. It was confirmed that the date of death was almost a month prior. And although they could not be precisely sure, forensic studies estimated that her death occurred around the dates Bailey organized the dates with the girl. They also stated that the body had bruises all over. Upon the discovery of Sydney's body and the emergence of this evidence, both suspects began to talk, or at least Aubrey did, as Bailey seemed to be in shock during all subsequent interrogations and cried while declaring her innocence of the crime, although she was not willing to implicate Aubrey or declare that he had planned the crime. On the other hand, Trail would give various versions and statements that would vary both in the interrogations conducted after the body was found and throughout the judicial process he would face in the coming months. This was further proof to finally classify him psychologically as a pathological liar, that is, a person who lies compulsively. Initially, after being placed in pretrial detention due to evidence suggesting he might try to escape to Mexico, Aubrey confessed that he had killed Sydney on his own and without Bailey's help. In the same statement, the man requested that the law of retaliation be applied. Indeed, he exclaimed that he should be executed for the murder of Sydney Loofe. However, as warrior-like and archaic as this sounded, Aubrey did not stick to his statement and later said that Sydney died after a third date they had, where the three of them were engaged in a threesome. Each one, consensually of course, was fulfilling their fantasies until it came to a point where, again consensually, Sydney's neck had to be tightened a bit. At that moment, Aubrey went too far and the young woman ended up dying from asphyxiation. At some point in this whole snowball of lies created by Aubrey, he began to tell the FBI agents something that wasn't entirely a lie because there was evidence that he did something similar, but not exactly as he told it. This was that he practically dedicated himself to uploading videos on the dark web, and these videos were of him, Bailey, and another girl. In this case, it was believed that Sydney participated in this, as he made them believe, and that these videos were quite perverse, in which clients with strange fetishes paid him to perform all these bizarre acts. Aubrey also said that he used the money he received from these videos to pay different young women to participate and help him make them. He claimed they were aware that there were practices or fetishes that could result in injuries or even death. He even went so far as to say that Sydney had consented to participate as part of the deal and that he had a video of her consenting to this. But obviously, as this was most likely a lie, such a video could never be seen by any of the authorities to be taken as verifiable evidence. Although Aubrey lied a lot in his statements and often contradicted himself, the authorities had to be attentive to anything that came out of his mouth since he occasionally told the truth, at least partially. For example, in one of his statements, he gave them a clue as to where they could find Sydney's phone, which was in the cemetery of Wilbur. When they went there, the police indeed found the girl's phone, along with her driver's license and credit cards. In 2018, the trial that would decide the fate of the two accused began. On June 11 of that year, the court announced that both Aubrey Trail and his girlfriend Bailey Boswell would face charges of first-degree murder and improper disposal of human remains. The prosecution expressed its plan to seek the death penalty for both due to the gruesomeness of the crime and because at the final moment of the trial, both defendants decided to plead not guilty, This was likely because their lawyers had a very distorted view of reality and sold their clients the idea that they could go free. During the trial, 3 women who had been involved with the couple testified. Thanks to this, very interesting details were revealed, such as that Aubrey had told them he was a kind of vampire who could read minds and obtained his powers by performing perverted rituals, while also claiming that he could gain more of these powers if he ever managed to kill a woman as part of these rites. One of these women also testified that when she stopped participating in meetings with the couple, Aubrey threatened her, saying he would kill her entire family if she revealed the atrocities that were taking place there. The defendant's lies fell apart when the prosecution's evidence conclusively demonstrated that this crime had indeed been premeditated and planned in advance. Some housekeepers from a nearby motel testified that they had seen Sydney with Bailey and Aubrey at the hotel weeks before the young woman's disappearance. Security cameras from another hotel near Sydney's workplace showed Bailey and Aubrey lurking around the area. On November 15 at around 11 a.m., the couple was seen buying a folding saw and food grinders at a local mall. The prosecution also presented phone tower records indicating that both had been waiting near Sydney's residence in the hours before she went to work on November 15. Apparently, they followed her to her workplace, where another security camera recorded Aubrey entering the hardware store in the afternoon, minutes before Sydney's shift ended, frequently glancing over his shoulder as if monitoring her. There were also security recordings showing Trail purchasing a large saw for wood, large-sized trash bags, and several lighters of bleach at a store. Although many searches were conducted, the saws that Trail supposedly used were never found. They also couldn't find traces of Sydney's DNA on the adult toys that were analyzed and found at the scene where her body was located. This is presumed to be due to the thorough cleaning with bleach that the man had carried out in the entire apartment. However, the FBI found traces of blood and Sydney's DNA on a pair of rubber gloves and on a pair of pants belonging to Aubrey. The same was found on an electrical cord that appeared to be the final cause of death for the 24-year-old woman. Following this, there was not much to be done. Aubrey's defense attorneys had attempted to portray the crime as a perverted threesome gone wrong, but with all the compelling evidence against this idea, it was abandoned. Bailey's defense, on the other hand, had a bit more success. They focused on her troubled adolescence and argued that her role in Sydney's death had been almost forced after being emotionally manipulated by Aubrey, who was twice her age. When the time came for the trial that would determine the final fate of the 52-year-old man, the jury decided that Aubrey Trail would be sentenced to death. This was for charges of first-degree murder and many more, such as conspiracy. Trail's defense attempted to appeal the verdict, but the judge denied this request. Meanwhile, Bailey's defense asked for her final sentence to be postponed for later. In October 2020, a jury sentenced her to life imprisonment for the same charges imposed on Aubrey. Bailey was not given the death penalty because the court considered the circumstances of her young age and the emotional manipulation by Trail in committing these acts. Today, Bailey is incarcerated in a women's correctional center in Nebraska, and Aubrey is on death row, awaiting the fulfillment of his sentence in the coming years. At some point during the trial, specifically when the prosecution began seeking the death penalty for Bailey, Aubrey became very upset because he wanted all the blame to fall on him and not on his partner. At that moment, he caused a scandal in the courtroom. After saying that Bailey did not understand and cursing everyone in the court, he suddenly pulled out a razor blade. It's unclear where he got it from, as he was in court, and attempted to harm himself in an area where he obviously intended to do the most damage. However, he did not die from this act, dispelling any notion that he was a vampire or had any special powers. Cindy James was born on June 12, 1944, the daughter of Otto and Matilda. Her original name was Cynthia Elizabeth Hack, but she later changed it to Cindy James for reasons that will become apparent. Her father, a retired colonel from the Canadian Air Force, and her mother, housewife, raised Cindy and her 5 siblings in a home known for its kindness, generosity, and friendliness. Cindy, characterized by her special nature and desire to help others, pursued a career in nursing. During this period, her father had re-enlisted with the Air Force and relocated the family to France, where she visited them during holidays. During this time, in letters to her family, Cindy occasionally referred to an unnamed intern she had met during her studies. She claimed that the two had at one point been engaged, and that, after finding he had terminal cancer, the man committed suicide while the couple were on a skiing trip. None of her parents or siblings, however, ever met the man, and Cindy did not name him. In the summer of 1965, Cindy met Roy Makepeace, a South African psychiatrist 18 years her senior. The two married on December 9, 1966, the same year she graduated from nursing school. Despite the age difference, their marriage initially seemed harmonious, and they began their life together with Cindy working as a nurse. In 1975, Cindy's career took a significant turn when she became the coordinator of a day center for minors with behavioral issues. Her dedication and passion for her work were evident during her 12-year tenure at the center. Cindy's commitment to the children was deeply appreciated by their parents, who recognized her profound impact and devotion. A pivotal moment in Cindy's life occurred after these 12 years when she decided to seek change. She left her job at the day center and accepted a nursing position at Richmond Hospital. Around the same time, Cindy and Roy's marriage ended in divorce. This marked a complete transformation in Cindy's life. She moved out of the house she shared with Roy, found a new place to live, adopted a pet, and immersed herself in work to stay occupied. This busy new lifestyle was Cindy's way of coping with the changes and challenges following her divorce. It's not clear why she divorced Roy. What has been found is that at least on 2 or 3 occasions, Roy had hit Cindy, so perhaps the reason she divorced was that he mistreated her. Despite this, it is known that Cindy and her ex-husband, Roy, claimed to have divorced on amicable terms, even though he had physically assaulted her several times. They maintained that they still had a good relationship and got along well. However, 4 months after her divorce and the beginning of her new life, Cindy's nightmare commenced. In October 1982, Cindy began receiving numerous unsettling phone calls at her home. Often, these calls were met with silence, as if no one was on the other end, or she would hear faint sounds like breathing or mumbling, but could not discern any clear message. This pattern persisted, suggesting that it was not an error but an intentional act to intimidate her. The calls were made from an untraceable number, leaving Cindy in the dark about the identity of the caller. On one occasion, while at home with friends, Cindy answered the phone only to hear the familiar, indiscernible noises. After hanging up, she noticed that the living room curtains, which she had previously closed, were now open. Startled, she closed the curtains and blinds, but the phone rang again. This time, the caller ominously remarked, "It's silly for you to hide. I know you're in the living room." This incident epitomized the terrifying reality Cindy faced daily, feeling watched yet unable to see her observer. The harassment escalated as Cindy began receiving bizarre letters in her mail. These letters, composed of newspaper clippings arranged to form threatening messages, conveyed ominous sentiments like "soon, Cindy, soon," and "you're dead." Additionally, some letters contained violent imagery, depicting assaulted women or a person brandishing a knife near a woman's image. Despite the palpable threat these letters posed, Cindy had no clue about their origin
and had never encountered the sender. Fearing for her safety and unsure of what to do, Cindy sought advice from her parents and ex-husband Roy. Both her parents and Roy urged her to contact the police and file a formal complaint, which Cindy did on October 12, 1982. The police, in their investigation, interviewed Cindy's friends and family to ascertain if anyone bore a grudge against her or knew of someone who might wish her harm. However, their efforts yielded no leads. Cindy, known for her compassionate and helpful nature as a nurse devoted to aiding people and children, was widely regarded as a genuinely kind and generous individual. This raised the question, who would want to harm someone like Cindy? The police were unable to identify anyone who wished to harm Cindy James, contrary to expectations that the situation would resolve after her complaint. The harassment persisted. Just 3 days later, while Cindy was in her kitchen, a brick shattered her window. Understandably alarmed, Cindy immediately contacted the police. On their arrival, officers conducted a thorough search of the house, yard, the alley behind the house, and the paths between the neighboring houses. Despite their efforts, they found no evidence of suspicious activity or clues to the perpetrator's identity. No witnesses had seen anyone. Leaving the police with no leads, it seemed as though Cindy was being attacked by an unseen force. A week later, as Cindy prepared for bed, she encountered another disturbing scene. In her bedroom, she found her pillow slashed as if someone had attacked it with a knife. Cindy again called the police, who this time dispatched a different officer, Patrick McBride, to investigate. He thoroughly examined the surroundings and spoke with Cindy. After their discussion, he expressed his belief that Roy, Cindy's ex-husband, was responsible for the attacks. Cindy was skeptical, finding it hard to believe, especially since Roy had advised her to contact the police. Nevertheless, Pat was convinced that Roy was the culprit. To enhance Cindy's safety, Pat installed locks on all the doors and set up detectors in her house. He committed to checking on her daily and did so for nearly a month. During this time, Pat and Cindy grew close, eventually starting a romantic relationship. While Pat lived with Cindy, the harassment ceased. However, Pat remained vigilant, continuing to monitor the house's surroundings. One day, he encountered Roy near the back of the house and confronted him. Roy explained that he was concerned for Cindy's safety and was checking to ensure she was not in danger from her stalker. Pat, however, doubted Roy's explanation and maintained his suspicion that Roy was the one harassing Cindy. After a month, Cindy decided to end her cohabitation with Pat, though their relationship did not immediately dissolve. Once Pat left, the tranquility that had settled during his stay vanished, and the unsettling phone calls, letters, and noises resumed, marking the return of Cindy's nightmare. On one occasion, Cindy arrived home to a horrifying scene: 3 dead cats inside her house, accompanied by a chilling note stating, "You're next." In an effort to enhance her security, Cindy installed lights on her porch to potentially spot any intruders. However, she frequently found her porch lights and phone line broken.
Despite repeatedly reporting these incidents to the police, their investigations yielded no evidence. There was no sign that anyone besides Cindy had been in or around the house. Not even footprints were found. As a result, the police decided to tap her phone in hopes of tracking the calls, but the brief duration of the calls hindered their ability to trace the caller's location. After some time, Cindy experienced her first physical attack. She had invited her close friend Agnes for a girls' night at her home. When Agnes arrived and noticed the house was dark, she suspected something was amiss. After attempting to reach Cindy without success, Agnes entered the house and found Cindy lying on the floor, unconscious, with her hands tied behind her back and a pair of nylon stockings wrapped tightly around her neck. Agnes quickly removed the stockings allowing Cindy to regain consciousness. Upon waking, Cindy could not recall the full extent of the attack. She remembered needing something from her garage, which required her to go outside, as there was no direct access from inside the house. It was during this moment that she was attacked from behind and strangled with the stockings. The only detail Cindy could remember about her attacker was that they wore white sneakers, a common and non-distinctive feature. Realizing her life could not continue in this manner, Cindy decided to make a radical change. She altered her appearance, dyed her hair, and chose to move out of her current residence, changing her last name from Hack to James. This decision led her to return to the house she had previously shared with her ex-husband, who offered her the place to live while he moved elsewhere. Although Roy's gesture appeared helpful, the circumstances surrounding it raised suspicions. After relocating to her former home, she continued to discover unsettling items on her porch, such as piles of raw meat accompanied by threatening notes declaring, "You're mixed," and "You are dead meat." These notes, crafted from newspaper clippings, reappeared relentlessly, along with a resumption of mysterious phone calls, now directed to her new number at Roy's house. Cindy persistently contacted the police regarding these incidents, and they responded each time. However, the officers were unable to find any physical evidence or signs of anyone else's presence besides Cindy's. This lack of evidence led the police to grow skeptical about her claims, suspecting that she might be fabricating the events. A grave concern since police protection depends on the credibility of the victim. Cindy had been enduring this harassment for almost 7 years, facing different forms of torment daily. Throughout these 7 years, the police, repeatedly visiting her property and finding no leads, started to feel worn out by the case. Realizing the diminishing attention and belief from the police, Cindy decided to hire a private detective. The detective installed special motion-activated lights on her porch, designed to illuminate the area whenever someone approached. These lights were strategically placed to avoid tampering, as previous outdoor lights had been repeatedly broken. He also provided Cindy with a walkie-talkie equipped with a panic button, enabling her to alert him, the authorities, and paramedics in case of an emergency. This device also allowed him to listen in on Cindy's surroundings, offering a way to monitor her safety. 2 days after receiving the walkie-talkie, Cindy informed the detective of her intention to walk her dog, leaving the device at home. Upon her return, the detective heard through the walkie-talkie that she had entered the house. However, shortly afterward, he detected unusual noises, suggesting someone else was present with Cindy. Faced with the dilemma of potentially alerting the intruder by speaking, he chose to drive to Cindy's house in an attempt to catch the individual in the act. On his arrival at Cindy James' house, he found a dire situation. Opening the door, he discovered Cindy lying unconscious on the floor with a dagger embedded in her hand. Between her hand and the dagger was a note, and around her neck were black nylon stockings as if someone had attempted to strangle her. He immediately assisted Cindy, called for paramedics, and she was swiftly taken to the hospital. Still alive, the note reading "You're dead meat" was particularly noteworthy as it was handwritten, suggesting the possibility of obtaining fingerprints or analyzing the handwriting for clues. At the hospital, doctors noticed a syringe mark on Cindy's arm, indicating she had been injected with a sedative. When Cindy regained consciousness, she was questioned about any recollections of her attacker or the incident. Unfortunately, her memory was blank. She could only recall entering her house after walking her dog and being attacked from behind. Following the injection, her memory ceased and she lost consciousness. Frustratingly, the police did not pursue any potential leads from the incident. They neglected to analyze the note for DNA or fingerprints, nor did they examine the dagger for any forensic evidence. Despite the presence of potential clues, the police remained convinced that Cindy was self-inflicting these wounds and orchestrating the entire scenario for attention. The private detective disagreed with the police's assessment and believed Cindy was not responsible for her own plight. Considering Cindy's history of being harassed for 7 years, he found it implausible that she would inflict such harm on herself, particularly in such a violent manner as her last attack. Resolute in finding the truth, he decided to explore the possibility of hypnosis, a common investigative technique in the 70s and 80s, to uncover any repressed memories Cindy might have of her assailant. However, the hypnosis session was unsuccessful, leaving Cindy's memory of the attack as elusive as ever. The possibility that Cindy's ex-partner, a psychiatrist, might have played a role in her amnesia was considered. Given his professional background, he could have had the knowledge and means to manipulate Cindy's memory using drugs or hypnotherapy. This theory, while speculative, raised questions about the extent of his involvement in her ordeal and the possibility of his using his expertise to conceal his actions. Despite the hypnosis session failing to unlock any memories for Cindy James, the police proceeded to administer a polygraph test. At the time, the polygraph was a widely used investigative tool, despite its reliability being questionable today. It is understood that a person who firmly believes in their version of events can pass a polygraph test. Cindy underwent the test and passed, indicating she was not lying according to the polygraph results. However, the police interpreted this outcome as Cindy being too traumatized to provide reliable results. This interpretation was in stark contrast to their earlier stance, where they believed Cindy was fabricating the events for attention, highlighting a contradiction in their approach and a reluctance to further investigate the case. Despite the police's skepticism, they decided to re-interview Roy, Cindy's ex-husband, and a prime suspect due to his background as a psychiatrist and access to medications and knowledge that could be used to harm Cindy. However, Roy denied any involvement. He too passed a polygraph test, which further complicated the investigation. The police's interest in the case persisted, driven by the curiosity surrounding the unexplained events occurring around Cindy. To monitor the situation, the police discreetly stationed a patrol car near Cindy's house for a week. During this period, no unusual incidents were reported. It was on December 11, 1985, that Cindy was found in a critical state. She was unconscious, with a black Malon stocking tied around her neck and a puncture mark on her arm from an injection. Cindy was physically battered and bore cuts on her body, but was alive. Taken to the hospital, she again had no memory of the attack upon regaining consciousness. After being discharged, Cindy, understandably frightened, invited her friend Agnes and Agnes' husband to stay at her house. That night, they reported hearing strange noises in the basement. Upon investigation, they discovered a fire in the basement. Agnes' husband noticed a person outside the house, not on the property but nearby, and looking towards the house. The identity of this person remained unknown due to the darkness and the distance. When they attempted to call for help, they discovered the phone line was cut, prompting Agnes' husband to seek assistance from neighbors. The firefighters were called and successfully extinguished the fire. After the fire incident in Cindy James' basement, the police conducted a thorough examination of her house, but found no evidence, such as footprints or any other signs of an intruder. Consequently, they concluded that Cindy was the one who started the fire. Due to their belief that Cindy was self-inflicting harm and the potential danger it posed, the police recommended she be admitted to a psychiatric institution. Feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about her situation, Cindy agreed to the hospitalization and spent the next 10 weeks in a psychiatric facility. On her release from the hospital,
Cindy realized the importance of sharing her experiences and suspicions to shed light on the ongoing nightmare. She gathered her friends, family, and the police to disclose information she had previously withheld. Cindy revealed that during one of the attacks, the assailant had threatened to harm her family if she ever disclosed her beliefs about the identity of her attacker. She expressed a firm conviction that her ex-husband was the stalker. The police, prompted by Cindy's revelation, interrogated Roy once more. Despite Cindy's accusations, Roy maintained his innocence, asserting that he had always supported her, even advising her to contact the police and offering her a place to stay. To bolster his claim, Roy presented a recording he claimed to have captured on the answering machine at the house where Cindy was living, which was previously their shared home. The recording featured a female voice, suggesting that a woman, not Roy, was harassing Cindy. The police's response to Roy's evidence and Cindy's accusations was disheartening. They seemed more inclined to believe that Cindy was fabricating the entire situation rather than pursuing leads that could reveal the true perpetrator. This approach led to a troubling scenario where the police favored Roy's narrative over Cindy's and hastily dismissed her claims. Roy further complicated matters by suggesting to the police that Cindy suffered from multiple personality disorder. This claim appeared baseless, as no such diagnosis was made during Cindy's extended stay in the psychiatric hospital. Roy's insistence on this theory, coupled with his actions and concerns for Cindy that seemed inconsistent with his claims, cast doubt on his credibility. The overall situation presented a perplexing and unresolved puzzle, with the police fixated on discrediting Cindy rather than thoroughly investigating the case.
On May 25, 1989, Cindy James started her day early, around 7 a.m., by going to the bank to deposit a check. She also visited a store to purchase groceries and had plans to meet with her best friend Agnes and Agnes' husband. Despite the police's suspicion that Cindy was fabricating the events surrounding her, their investigation continued. It's notable that over the 7 years of Cindy's case, the police spent an estimated $1.5 million, indicating the significant resources dedicated to the investigation. However, there was a sense of wariness from the police, as if they were conducting the investigation out of obligation rather than genuine concern. On the day in question, when Agnes and her husband arrived at Cindy's house, they found it odd that she wasn't there. While an empty house might not usually cause concern, Cindy's situation was different due to the ongoing harassment she faced. Agnes decided to alert the police while they searched for Cindy at places she might have visited, like the bank and the store. Their search led them to Cindy's car in the bank's parking lot. The presence of the car in the afternoon, after the bank's closing hours, raised alarm, especially considering her plans with her friends. Approaching the car, they found Cindy was not inside, deepening their concern. They went to the police station to report the situation. Despite initially being told they must wait 24 hours to file a missing person report, they convinced an officer to investigate due to the unique circumstances of Cindy's case. The officer, inspecting the car at night, discovered bloodstains on the driver's seat and found Cindy's purse, bank card, and a deposit receipt inside the car. The receipt showed Cindy had been at the bank early that morning. In the trunk were her grocery bags and a gift she had purchased for her friends at approximately 2:25 p.m. With this information, the police proceeded to Roy's apartment to question him. Arriving close to dawn, they found Roy at home. He explained that he had spent the afternoon and evening with a friend, having dinner and then staying at the friend's house until about 11:30 p.m. Roy's alibi appeared solid and could be corroborated, leading the police to continue their search for Cindy elsewhere. The disappearance of Cindy James mobilized the entire city of Richmond in a massive search operation. Helicopters, dogs, vehicles, and numerous people were deployed in an extensive effort to locate her. The search extended to various terrains, including underwater areas and the port, encompassing the wide radius around the location where her car was found. Despite the exhaustive efforts and resources utilized, Cindy remained missing. On June 8th of the same year, more than 2 weeks after her disappearance, Cindy was found in the yard of an abandoned house, approximately an hour and a half's distance from where her car had been located. The discovery was made in a region relatively close to the initial search area, which was surprising given the scale and intensity of the search efforts. The abandoned house, situated in an area frequented by many people, led investigators to theorize that Cindy could not have been left there for the entire duration of her disappearance. The likelihood of her being seen by passersby in such a busy area suggested that she may have been held captive elsewhere before being left at the location. Cindy's body exhibited signs of severe physical abuse, including bruises, cuts, and a syringe injection mark on her arm. She was found with her hands and feet bound, and a black nylon stocking was tied around her neck, consistent with previous incidents. The autopsy revealed that Cindy had been injected with a substantial amount of morphine and another sedative medication, leading to the conclusion that she had been drugged and then strangled. The police's conclusion about the case was controversial and unexpected. They posited that Cindy had committed suicide by injecting herself with a lethal dose of morphine and another sedative, then walking a significant distance barefoot to the location where she was found. Remarkably, her feet were clean and her shoes were not found nearby. The police theorized that Cindy managed to tie her own hands and feet and strangle herself with the nylon stocking. This conclusion was met with skepticism and disbelief due to the implausibility of the scenario and the lack of concrete evidence to support such a theory. Several alternative theories have been proposed to explain Cindy's tragic fate. One theory suggests that her ex-husband was responsible for the harassment and attacks. This theory posits that Roy's apparent compassion and offers of help were tactics to divert suspicion from himself. Another theory implicates Pat, the police officer who developed a close relationship with Cindy. It suggests that Pat may have been her stalker, using his position to gain her trust, and then resuming the harassment after their relationship ended. However, this theory is complicated by the lack of concrete evidence linking him to the crimes. A less credible theory is that Cindy was responsible for the attacks herself, due to a mental disorder. This theory is largely dismissed due to the nature of her injuries and the circumstances of her death, which seem beyond the realm of self-infliction. Lastly, there is the possibility that an unknown stalker, unrelated to Cindy's close acquaintances, was responsible for the harassment and attacks. This theory considers the potential involvement of an outsider who targeted not only Cindy but potentially others as well. Each theory presents its own set of questions and uncertainties, leaving the true nature of Cindy Jane's tragic experiences unresolved. Melanie Stacy Amaya was born on February 22, 2002, in the municipality of San Rafael, in the department of Antioquia, Colombia. Her parents, William Amaya and Maria Leon, were overjoyed at her birth despite being very young. They had been planning to have a daughter, and their wish was finally fulfilled. Later, the family grew with the arrival of another girl, Natalie. The two sisters got along very well and played together all the time. From her childhood, Melanie showed a cheerful and fun personality. Her smile was her main feature, and she was also very flirtatious, often asking her mother for makeup to paint her dolls. Despite not having many resources, her parents always managed to give her everything she needed. She was one of the best students in school, with excellent grades. Over the years, Melanie developed a very strong character. She was proud and always wanted to be right about everything. However, this did not prevent her from having an excellent relationship with her mother. Whenever they fought, they would reconcile, share everything, and support each other. When Melanie entered adolescence, her parents separated on good terms. Shortly after, Maria met Ruben Morales, and they became a couple. Later, they decided to move in together. Both Melanie and her sister went with them, settling in the Manrique neighborhood in Medellin. Their relationship with their stepfather was excellent. They considered him their second father. Ruben respected their bond with William, always reminding them that he was there to help raise them, but did not want them to stop seeing their biological father. By the time she turned 16, Melanie was a very pretty young woman who liked to dress up and go out partying. She had many friends who held her in high esteem. It was at this time that she discovered her passion: electronic music. She decided she wanted to be a DJ, and her family supported her in everything, beginning to save money to buy her a console. They were sure that whatever she did would be excellent, as she was extremely intelligent. However, Melanie never got to fulfill her dreams. On Thursday, June 28, 2018, Melanie was getting ready to go to the birthday party of Isaac, her best friend. Although they had celebrated the week before, they were ready for another party. The party was to be held at a nightclub located on Carrera 45, an area known for its nightlife. When she finished getting ready, she told her mother that she was leaving. Her mother asked her to take care and not to return too late. They hugged, and Melanie got into her Uber heading to the club, but she never arrived. Isaac arrived at the nightclub and noticed his friend's absence. The techno music was very loud, and the place was crowded. He began to look for her everywhere. When he couldn't find her, he started sending her messages, but Melanie didn't respond. Isaac thought she might be with Maria Alejandra, her neighbor and closest friend, and decided to wait until the next day and celebrated his birthday as usual. Maria woke up at 7 in the morning and noticed that her daughter had not returned. Her room was just as she had left it the night before while getting ready. Worried, Maria began to call her phone, but it was out of service. She thought it might be out of battery and that Melanie might be at a friend's house, but it seemed strange that she had not tried to communicate with her. Maria decided to call Isaac, who told her that Melanie had never arrived at the nightclub and might be with a friend. Maria contacted all of her daughter's acquaintances, but there were no signs of her, and no one knew her whereabouts. Finally, she spoke to some friends who said that Melanie had arrived at the club's door, but did not enter, thinking she might have gone to another party. Completely desperate, Maria called her ex-husband and gave him the terrible news. He tried to calm her, saying it was still early and that Melanie might be sleeping at someone's house. But the afternoon came, and Melanie did not appear. Her parents tried to report her disappearance at the police station, but since it was a holiday, they were not taken seriously and were told to wait longer. Trying to stay composed, her parents thought she might have gone to a farm, probably celebrating the long weekend, likely with no cell phone signal, and that's why she hadn't communicated with them. But deep down, they knew that wasn't true. They sensed that something bad was happening. Maria, Ruben, and William began their own search, covering all the places where they thought Melanie could be, from the houses of her acquaintances to parks and the streets of the nightclubs she frequented. After an initial search, they decided to post flyers all over the city with a detailed description of the young girl, including a photograph that Melanie had taken the night she disappeared. She was seen wearing a short blouse, light blue jeans, and white sneakers. Her physical characteristics were described as slender, short in height, with black hair, brown eyes, and several tattoos. a rose on her chest, a moon on her forearm, and wings on her back. Her most distinctive tattoos were a fish on her right leg, covering a motorcycle burn, and one under her clavicle that said, "Crazy Life." She also had a belly button piercing and a peritonitis scar on her abdomen, making her easily recognizable. While distributing the flyers to pedestrians and police officers on the street, they made it clear they were utterly desperate and that the official search should start as soon as possible. The news spread quickly, and social media was flooded with images of Melanie. The weekend passed terribly. Maria couldn't sleep, constantly thinking about her daughter. Finally, early on Monday, Maria went to the police station to report her daughter missing. The search was categorized as urgent due to Melanie being a minor. Officers checked hospitals and morgues to see if anyone named Melanie or matching her physical characteristics had been admitted, but they found no trace of her. Melanie's parents clung to the hope of finding her alive, but the days became longer and her absence more worrying. Then, the first lead emerged. A witness approached the police station to give a statement, saying they had seen Melanie on the night of June 28 near the El Palmar soccer field. They noted that the young woman was dirty and beaten, as if she had fallen, and was accompanied by a young man wearing loose clothes, a cap, and large sports shoes. While this testimony contributed to the search, the situation remained complicated. The description of the boy with Melanie was very general, as most of her friends dressed that way. However, Maria thought of one person, Miguel Naranjo, her daughter's ex-boyfriend. The 18-year-old had ended his relationship with Melanie 3 months earlier on bad terms. Maria asked her younger daughter to contact him. Miguel claimed to know nothing about Melanie's whereabouts, emphasizing that he hadn't seen her for weeks. He then expressed great concern, saying he would be devastated if something happened to her, as he still cared for her deeply. However, days later, more testimonies contradicted Miguel's statements, with all witnesses saying they saw them together at a party that night and that he was very drunk. Following these declarations, the prosecutor's office began to consider Miguel the main suspect in Melanie's disappearance. They obtained a warrant to search his house, but they found no trace of Melanie, leaving them back where they started, without the slightest idea of the girl's whereabouts. On July 5 of the same year, Maria woke up in anguish, unable to believe that her daughter was still missing. She prayed to God to bring her back, alive or dead, as she couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. Her prayers were answered, but not in a good way. That same day, Maria received a call from an unknown number. On the other end of the line, a voice told her to stop searching for her daughter because she was already in another world and buried in a place called El Calvario. Without allowing for more questions, the caller asked Maria not to reveal their identity to the police, as they had not spoken earlier due to fear. After the call ended, Maria quickly headed to the police station. Along with her husband and 2 officers, they set out towards the mountain, and she also notified everyone she knew to help with the search. They arrived at El Granizal neighborhood of Medellin, where the mountain was located. The territory was large, with many entrances and full of bushes. To reach the hill, they had to climb many steep stairs and pass through squatter houses, which was extremely dangerous. They decided to split into several groups to cover the area more quickly. Ruben went towards an area full of bushes, behind one of the houses. The ground was full of large footprints, as if someone had been dragged. He followed the trail and noticed a sight with many flies buzzing around at the penetrating odor. He grabbed a stick and began moving the rocks on the ground. When he turned over one of them, he saw something terrible, a human head. He immediately called the police officers who were searching nearby. At first, they thought it could be an animal, as animals were often dumped in that area. They continued removing stones and spotted blood. Finally, they could clearly see the face, which was completely disfigured, but it was evident that it belonged to a human body. Maria couldn't stop crying, not wanting it to be her daughter. Natalie thought it might be another girl who had also been missing for some time. The whole family was in denial. The officers notified the forensic medicine services. When they were able to unearth the body, all doubts were cleared. Despite the mutilation, they could discern the tattoo on the girl's chest. The body was completely unclothed, with the mouth open and filled with dirt, all teeth broken, and one of the eyes dislodged. There was also something very strange. The person who buried her had thrown calcium oxide over her. The body was exhumed by the criminalistics and transferred to the Institute of Legal Medicine and Forensic Sciences. After a few hours, experts confirmed that it was none other than Melanie. Although her body showed signs of all types of violence, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxia. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, it could not be determined if the young woman had been sexually abused, but they could confirm that she had been severely mistreated. Her family was inconsolable. There was no longer any hope of finding her alive, but they could still find the terrible person who had committed the sinister crime. The media published the news of the discovery, and all viewers' eyes turned to Ruben, believing that the fact he had found the body while alone made him a possible suspect. However, the community had other opinions. They knew Melanie had no enemies, but had an idea of who might want to harm her. Everyone was aware that her relationship with Miguel had not ended well and that he was a rather violent young man. Meanwhile, Miguel continued sending messages to Melanie's relatives, saying he was very distressed by the young woman's loss and had done everything possible to find her. But no one believed him anymore, and an angry mob of neighbors showed up at his home to lynch him. The police took advantage of this event to take him to the police station, claiming they were protecting him, but the real objective was to interrogate him. His statement was quick. He said he was innocent and seemed very sure of his words. As there was no evidence against him, they had to let him go. Almost simultaneously, Ruben was cleared of any involvement in the case. There was no evidence suggesting he had anything to do with his stepdaughter's murder. Even with Miguel as the main suspect, investigators began to delve into the relationship he had with Melanie. According to sources close to the young woman, the couple met in 2016 when she was 14 and he was 17. Melanie organized a party with her best friends and hired a DJ who was Miguel. She was enchanted by him, and they began dating that same week, later becoming official. They went everywhere together, even on outings with friends. Everyone liked Miguel. They noticed he was loving with Melanie and cared for her deeply. Over the months, the young man started spending more and more time at her house, becoming an integral part of the family. Maria knew that Miguel had problems with his mother. He had told her that she often beat him and sometimes left him without food. Melanie's family cared for him so much that they decided to take him into their home as if he were another son. In the first months of living together, everything was rosy, and they were closer than ever. However, over time, the relationship between the two teenagers began to crumble. They argued constantly, and Miguel was extremely bothered by Melanie's liking for dressing up flirtatiously. She was so affected that she decided to leave school and started doing something she had never done before, consuming substances. Maria took a while to realize this and confronted her daughter. Melanie told her she had only done it a few times, always in Miguel's company. This is how Miguel lost all the trust and respect of the family, and from then on, the situation only worsened. The fights became violent and physical. Miguel constantly hit Melanie, leaving marks on her neck and arms. One day, he beat her so severely that he stained the entire room with blood. Maria tried to help her daughter, but Melanie asked her not to interfere in their relationship and pleaded to continue living together. Their friends were also worried. They noticed how her spirit was fading. They saw her cry every day and advised her to leave him. After 2 years of ups and downs, on May 23, 2018, the young couple had their last violent fight. Melanie decided to definitively leave Miguel and threw him out of her house. But he did not accept this and began to stalk and follow her everywhere. Ruben decided to go to the prosecutor's office to report that his stepdaughter was in danger and request a restraining order. But sadly, this measure was never carried out. In the following months, Miguel continued to seek Melanie, swearing that if she gave him another chance, he would do things differently, but she never agreed. And so, without any help from the police, the young woman tried to continue with her life as normally as possible until the terrible incident on June 28. After gathering all possible testimonies about the young couple's relationship, the officers investigated Miguel's criminal history. They discovered that despite his young age, he already had reports of domestic abuse. Records indicated he had beaten his mother and siblings. They also found the report Ruben had filed months earlier and the testimony of a friend of Melanie's. This young man declared that Miguel had said if he found out she was with someone else, he would kill her, but that wasn't the most shocking part. The person who had called Maria decided to reveal their identity. It was a relative of Miguel's who lived with him in a residence, very close to where Melanie's body was found. The relative recounted that on the night of June 29, they saw Miguel arrive at the house around midnight with a shovel and muddy shoes. Minutes later, he started a fire and began burning clothes and makeup, then took a long shower. With all the evidence gathered, on July 10 of that year, the agents obtained an arrest warrant against Miguel. He voluntarily presented himself at the police and was charged with aggravated femicide. He did not accept the charges and declared himself innocent, with a strange smile on his face. After 6 months of delaying the judicial process, Miguel decided to make a plea deal, accepting the charges that identify him as the author of the crime in exchange for a reduced sentence. Once the judges agreed, he began to recount the last hours of the young woman's life. On June 28, 2018, Miguel saw Melanie at the disco where Isaac's birthday party would be held. He approached to talk to her, but quickly noticed she was exchanging messages with another boy. This triggered uncontrollable jealousy in him. He couldn't believe she already had another man. They began a heated argument, which turned violent. He hit her hard and threw her to the ground. Then they went to a football field, where the dispute continued. At some point, he grabbed her by the neck and strangled her until she died. At that moment, he decided to hid her body. He then returned home to burn her clothes and belongings. In his statement, Miguel excused himself by saying he had acted under the influence of drugs. The account was quite imprecise. Miguel did not want to clarify where he killed Melanie or how he hid the body. The agents assumed that after taking her to the sports complex, he persuaded her to talk alone near where he buried her. They only had 2 certainties. Miguel was guilty of femicide, and his motive for committing the crime had been jealousy and obsession. Psychological analyses showed that he was an aggressive, possessive person with an explosive character. However, they also proved that he was fully aware of his actions when he committed the crime, so he had to face trial. On Friday, January 18, 2019, almost 7 months after the young woman's murder, the first hearing was held. Miguel was found guilty of aggravated femicide and sentenced to 34 years and 8 months in prison. After hearing the jury's decision, he apologized to Melanie's family and society and was transferred to a prison in Medellin. While the family was satisfied with the verdict, they all said they would never forgive him. Through the trial, they united more than ever. The young woman's biological father thanked everyone on his Facebook account for the support they had given him during the process. He said that although the sentence would not bring his daughter back,
It at least set an example that such cases do not always go unpunished. However, there is a reality. The authorities had been alerted about Mikkel's dangerousness. If they had followed through with the restraining order, Melanie might still be alive.